Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. This is sort of our new, I like to call it, Sean, the RTCF show, right? And it is basically recruiting, some sort of Notre Dame team-related topic, and then a college football topic. That's where the CF comes from. So today, Sean, we're going to talk recruiting first, then we're going to talk about some Notre Dame team aspects, and then we're going to follow up on what we discussed last week when we talked about is the Alabama Dynasty over or on its last leg. We both said we don't think it's over, but it's on its trajectory down. So we'll talk about, well, then who steps into those shoes? Is there another dynasty coming? Is it going to create a time of parity in college football that everybody loves, the word parity? We have not seen a lot of that over the years. There's usually some program or two or three that kind of emerges as the dominant programs with the occasional 2019 LSU sneaking in for that one-year wonder, and we'll dive in. And can that dynasty team be Notre Dame? That's what we're going to discuss as well. So let's begin with some recruiting discussion, Sean. And today we're going to talk about just where Notre Dame is in recruiting and can they close in the month of June? Because we're getting ready to start off. Today is Saturday, May 28th. We got Memorial Day coming up on Monday. As we said yesterday, huge shout out to all of our vets, but also prayers to the families of those who, Memorial Day is about those we've lost, whether those we've lost in battle or those who have since gone, like my grandfather who fought in the Battle of the Bulge and has since passed on, but did not pass during that. Those are that's who we remember and appreciate and respect and love, obviously. But when we talk about the month of June, which follows right after Memorial Day, Notre Dame gets real busy, Sean, and it's going to be a lot of 23 and 24 kids on campus. And it gets down to, you laid the foundation in April. You added to the class in May. You got Devin Houston to kick things off. You got Sullivan Absher. You got Owen Wafel in the 2024 class. And then, of course, this week we saw Notre Dame land Jay Lamar. Mm-hmm. And, so you've kind of kept the ball rolling. April and May were busy periods for Notre Dame. And now you go into June. And basically now June is the success Notre Dame is going to have in June, Sean, and meaning either guys they land in June or set themselves up to land in July or August is going to define whether this is a really good top 5 class or a legitimate number 1 contending type of class. And so we're going to kind of go through the month of June and look at where we think Notre Dame should or needs to be by the end of July, basically before fall camp starts. What moves need to happen that'll make us feel like, okay, they're in a place where they're going to fill this thing out and finish this thing strong? Because the goal is, Sean, whether it's number 1 class, number 2 class, number 3, it's to get that elite gap closing class. And right now they sit at 13. And as we talked about in our show yesterday, I believe it was, or maybe it's Thursday, they are way out in front of all the other schools right now. Can you continue adding to it? That's what we're going to find out. So, Sean, big month of June ahead of Notre Dame. And then, of course, what then happens in July is going to be such an important period for Notre Dame.
I can't add anything else to that, man. I think we go into the month of June. And my question, this is my first time really being in the midst of a recruiting cycle. Mm-hmm. And it's absolutely amazing and exciting to be a part of with this staff and the work they're putting in.
You picked a good time.
Like, Brian, we have to, as a staff, we have to constantly stay on top of each other, watching social media. Like, oh, this kid is visiting now. Oh, add this kid. And I'm saying to myself, how is Chad and the rest of the staff able to, juggle all of these balls between 22, 23, 24. Mm-hmm. But they've done a tremendous job. The cohesion we hear from recruits talking about the collaborative effort from all coaches on the staff and no coaches left out on the island just lends itself to believing that the plan that they have going into this month is ultimately going to lead to a very successful month coming out of it.
And they're in closing mode. That's the key. I mean, I'm looking at this list of players, right? And there's going to be some guys added and some guys we want to still confirm and make sure, the specific dates. But when you look at it, Ronan Hannafin, Monroe Freeling, Jason Moore, Jaden Alsbury, Christian Gray, Caleb Downs, Micah Tease. When I look at that list of players, every single one of those kids as far as I can tell, maybe Jason Moore might be the only exception. But every single one of those kids, except maybe Jason Moore, has been on Notre Dame's campus at least twice before.
Yeah.
You look at the weekend of Richard Young has never been on campus.
Right.
You look at the next weekend. You've got Jeremiah Love, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Hall, Micah Bell, and Josiah Wagner coming on campus. Now, that's a weekend where you don't have as many guys that have been on campus before, except for Jeremiah Love. Jaden Greathouse has been on campus once. And then we expect Charles Jagasol to show up at some point in time right after that weekend because of some things going on to make his schedule work to fit his mom's schedule to get him on campus. But that's the thing is when you've had that many kids on campus multiple times, or at least recently in the case of Jaden Greathouse, you're not going into this mode to this visit period, Sean, saying, well, let's show these kids what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
This is let's close the deal.
Yeah.
And their ability to close is going to determine over the next month is going to determine things. And it's been really amazing to see what this staff has been able to do with some guys that haven't been on campus. I mean, Devin Houston hadn't been on campus since January and they closed out on him.
Yeah.
We had another situation recently with Jade Lamar where, he went a long period of time and even though he visited in April for the Blue Gold game, what we know is that he actually committed to Notre Dame silently before that visit, but didn't want to go public because he still wanted to make the visit to make sure. But the fact that Dylan McCullough, who had not been hired since the last time he was on campus back in the fall, was able to get him in the class without the kid being on campus was huge. But now you get these kids back on campus again, and it comes down to, okay, it's about closing time. And if you look at the guys on campus, Sean, I mean, these are key parts of the class. There's one kid missing for right now, and we won't dive into that conversation for right now.
Right.
But there are some very, very, very important players that are going to be on campus this summer, and this staff is going in not in a let's impress them mode, but what do we have to do to close? And I mean, that's exactly where you want to be right now, Sean.
And they're building, right? Like you said, the foundation has been laid with the coaching staff and the way they're approaching everything. And that goes from the top down. And you hear the same mantra you talk to the coaches, like, why is this happening? Why is that happening? They'll all tell you it starts at the top. It starts at the top, no matter who you talk to. So Marcus Freeman has done an incredible job of putting forth what needs to happen as the staff in recruiting. And we saw, unfortunately, what we talked about last week, we saw just a little residue of something that we might not want to happen in the process of recruiting going to the next level at Notre Dame. But, that's par for the course, and things like that are going to end up happening. Now we move forward and we walk into the month of June with an expectation now as a fan base that things are going to happen, even if we don't publicly hear about it, maybe until July or August.
Right.
You get the feeling that there are some good things about to happen in the month of June.
Right.
And when you can get a kid like Richard Young, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, even losing out on Rodney Gallagher this week, just reading the article with Mike White in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, when his father, Rodney Gallagher II, talked about, for a time there, Notre Dame pretty much came in and stole the show and almost made their family forget about what the plan was for Rodney.
Right.
And that's just how well the plans for Notre Dame from a recruiting standpoint have been working with these young men and their families. You pointed that out to me. For his family to say that.
Right.
It's one thing for the kid to say it.
Because it was obvious the family was pushing for him
Absolutely.
to stay close to home.
But for the family to say that, that means more than just the kid saying that. So now you feel extreme confidence. We cover it. We talk to these coaches. We talk to the recruits. And there's an extreme confidence going into the month of June that Notre Dame is going to close the deal in June 2022, probably better than they've ever closed the deal in a recruiting class before. I wish I got Lewis here to be able to talk to us about this and give us a historical background and comparisons, but this has to be and could end up being one of the greatest months from a recruiting standpoint in the history of Notre Dame football.
And it would be fascinating to talk with Lou about is June the new December?
Yeah. Great point.
Like that would be fascinating to talk with Lou about because that's what he would always tell me is the The Notre Dame classes were determined in December. Is like it was the under Lou Holtz. It was like that banquet time. It was like they'd have like the huge banquet weekends, and like almost all the class was kind of filled out between December, like for the banquet, and signing day in February.
Yeah.
And there were fascinating stories. And now it's kind of like, now is this that new period where you're going to fill your now? Of course, there's a much longer waiting period when you close in June because kids can't sign until December. Although I would personally love to see this early signing period get moved up to July 31st to allow kids that want to just I know where I'm going, I want to sign and not have to worry about schools calling me, because as long as these kids aren't signed, schools can keep calling them, and it's an unfortunate part of the aspect of it. However, I think there's a couple reasons why I think Notre Dame isn't in such a good position to close. There's really three that I focus on, Sean. The current ranking, I think, is huge. There's tons of momentum. Right. Like you're bringing these kids on campus with the number one ranked recruiting class, and the only team that can possibly jump them between now and then is Texas Tech with just volume. Right. But none of these kids that they're bringing on campus are guys that were like, well, Texas Tech is a competitor for us. That's just the only kid that was true. They dropped and they're not bringing them on campus because they don't bring kids who are committed to other programs on campus for official visits. So he was unwilling to decommit. And so the staff has moved on from that, which is fine. Just like they don't want their committed kids visiting other schools officially. There's a difference between unofficial and official. That's just kind of how they look at it. So I think the current ranking is huge. You have that great class to build around. And then, we talked about all the guys that are going to be on campus that are uncommitted. Well, we're going to see Cooper Flanagan, Sullivan Absher, Sam Pendleton, Devin Houston, Adon Schuler, Brendan Vernon, Drake Bowen. We're going to see a lot of these kids getting on campus for those 2 weekends in June or for their official visits. And some of them they're going to hold off until the fall. I've been told, Keon Keeley might be making a visit this summer. I'm not sure if that's finalized, if it's official, unofficial. That's why we haven't.
Drake's going to be visiting 3 of the weekends.
Yeah, hopefully, as long as it depends on obviously the baseball.
He started the playoffs
down south. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But I mean, there's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of buzz. I think the second aspect of it is what I already talked about, the fact that so many of these kids have already been on campus before. A lot of the show them around, get a feel for the thing has already been done. You can really focus on your program, the relationship, and closing. And then, the third part of it too, Sean, is I think the reason Notre Dame has set themselves up for success this month is because I would say conservatively, Notre Dame leads for 7 of the kids that are going to be on campus this weekend. Like, I feel confident saying, and you tell me if you disagree with this, I'd say Ronan Hannafin. We believe Monroe Freeling, although others would disagree with that, understandably. We have Jason Moore, Jaden Osbury, Jaden Love, Jeremiah Love, Jaden Greathouse, and Charles Jagasol. Right. Now, some would say, Sean, you would want to throw Christian. I think you'd probably want to throw Christian Gray into that conversation.
I would say it's trending that way.
Yeah.
And it is a situation where, look, it's a 17-year-old we're dealing with. Right. He could wake up one morning and start leaning towards LSU.
And that's true of all these guys. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, but he's at a point where, if he had to choose today, and we discussed this, I think he would go Notre Dame.
I think he finally realized that he is a Notre Dame kid, is what I think. And now we'll see if they can close the deal on him. So then I would say confidently, I feel confident about 6 to 7 guys with an 8th that is at least trending. And that's where you want to be. And then there's some guys like Micah Bell, who's never been on campus, that I think Notre Dame's in a really good position with, but it's hard for me to say they lead for a kid who's never been on campus before.
Yeah.
There's some other guys. Micah Tease, I don't feel as confident in as maybe some others. Caleb Downs, I don't feel that they lead for. Josiah Wagner just dropped the top 7 that has Notre Dame in it. He's never been to campus before. So there are some of those type of situations. And so I think those are areas where I feel Notre Dame is in a good position. So, and we just had a huge long update. None of the things I just said should surprise anyone that's on the message board, because we had a huge recruiting update the other day that talked about almost all the kids that I just mentioned, including some nuggets that I got from you and a couple other sources about Christian Gray in the direction that is trending. So And then there's like Rico Flores. I think it's a guy that's like Christian Gray that I think Notre Dame is gaining momentum for, although I'm not confident that they lead. I think that the perception that they lead has more to do with the uncertainty of whether or not he's definitely a take at Ohio State or Georgia. And I think if they turn up the heat on him in June, then maybe that momentum could be stalled, or maybe Notre Dame will be able to build on the fact that, hey, we never said you weren't a take for us,
Right.
close. So that's kind of where they're at, Sean. So
where would you say is it? I'm asking this,
Mhm.
like I said, my first time doing this and being in the midst of a full cycle. Is the wide receiver position the most domino effect position in recruiting, or is it the quarterback? Because I've kind of gotten that sense.
domino and what, like if you get one,
Like
they all
guys,
start.
guys wait. Oh, this guy went here.
Mhm.
Oh, that domino fell. So now maybe I look here or maybe I look there. It just seems like with the wide receiver position, there are schools like, Rico Flores' decision could be influenced
Right.
by someone else's decision, or
Right.
Malik Elzy, a 23 kid that Notre Dame was looking at, could be influenced by someone else's decision, or the way the room is looking, or the numbers are looking in a particular class at a particular school. It's just amazing to me how it seems like the wide receiver position, especially right now, seems to be in that area where guys are looking at, okay, who's a take,
Yeah.
who's not a take, where's this kid going, how does
Yeah.
that impact where this kid might
I
go?
think there's a lot of that, Sean. I
Yeah,
do. I think it's twofold. Number one is part of it is like you just said, you may be a take for a school now, but then if they get so and so, you're not a take for them anymore.
right.
The other aspect of it is some of these kids want to go through the recruiting process as long as they can, enjoy it, take all the visits. They know where they want to go, but they want to go through the process. And when there's nobody in the class, you can do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think that I think receivers that way. I'd say any position where you're going to recruit 3 to 4 guys, it is that. I would say the same thing about like offensive line. I'd say the same thing about defensive line. I think a lot of those positions where, hey, we're going to bring in 4 guys.
Yeah.
Well, you have 4 spots still open. So I don't need to rush. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but you've got Braylon James in your class. Let's just say hypothetically that Jaden Greathouse, just for argument's sake, that Jaden Greathouse or Ronan Hannafin commit to Notre Dame soon after their June visits. Just for, again, I'm not dropping intel. Like, I'm just saying, because I don't know when those guys are going to make a decision.
The topic, this is what
Let's just say, for argument's sake, that one of those guys commits after the June 10th weekend or after the June 17th weekend. No, let's say Ronan Hannafin commits after the June 10th weekend, right? 10th to 12th. So now half your class is kind of at that spot is now full. Well, then Jaden Greathouse jumps into class. Now that gives them 3. Now all of a sudden it's like, hey, Rico, right? We need to kind of know now. And I know you're announcing July 3rd, but we need to know now. And then you kind of start to move. Or let's say Jaden Greathouse knows where he wants to go, but he wants to maybe take some officials in the fall. Ronan Hannafin jumps on board. Then Rico Flores jumps on board on July 3rd, for argument's sake. Now, all of a sudden, can Jaden Greathouse really wait until down the road, right?
Down the road,
so, and again, I don't know that Jaden Greathouse is going to do that. All of that was simply making up situations in order to prove the point, or to make the point that once the dominoes really start to fall, other guys have to start making decisions. And then as a staff, it's good for you as well, because if you think you lead for a guy, but he's unwilling to commit, knowing spots are getting tight, that really tells you more about where you stand with him than you do another school, right? So, like, I think that this is the time you really learn about kids. Like, Notre Dame was recruiting a kid that was committed to another school. They liked him. They offered him. They wanted to bring him on for a visit. They had a visit scheduled. But the thing is like, but you got to decommit before we're going to bring you on campus. And he wasn't willing to do that. I think that tells you a lot about where you stand with that kid. Like, if he's not willing to decommit from the school to visit us, then that's okay. Like, I think they respected that decision, but it says a lot about what is your interest level in us, kind of thing, looking at it from a coach's perspective. So I think this June period also is that period of time. I think offensive line's the same way. Like, okay, if one more offensive lineman jumps on board, let's say Charles Jagasol, just for argument's sake, again, after he visits Notre Dame, he's like, okay, this is where I want to be. And he decides early July that that's the case.
Right.
Monroe Freeling may want to play it out in the fall. But if Notre Dame is really where you want to be, maybe you need to rethink the timing of it. And if he doesn't, and he's unwilling to do that, and he wants to go through and take officials in the fall and decide after his senior season, that's okay. But you may need to go get another guy and then make Monroe your fifth, as opposed to him being your fourth, and then you stop it at 4. Right. So I think all those things factor into what makes this June an important period of time for Notre Dame. And let's go position by position just real quick, Sean, and just discuss who's coming on campus and where we think Notre Dame is in regard to closing out on these players. We'll kind of go top to bottom. We'll go running back. Notre Dame will host Richard Young June 13th to 15th. He is a 5-star running back from Lehigh Acres Senior High School in Florida. Stud player. He's going to be on campus June 13th to 15th. And then Jeremiah Love from St. Louis Christian Brothers is going to be on campus 17 to 19. Now, one question that people have had is, would Notre Dame take both of them to go with Jay Lamar? The answer is yes. They were already talking about bringing Jeremiah Love on as a third back because he's kind of an athlete. He can play receiver. He can play safety. He can play multiple positions. They just want him. Like, that's the thing about Jeremiah. Same thing with like Ronan Hannafin, Samuel Mpemba. People keep asking, where are these guys going to play? And the response I keep getting is, I mean, we don't care. Same with Micah Tees. We just want those kids. We'll figure out where to play them. Right. We'll let them fit. Where do you want to start? We'll tell you but we just want you on the football team. Yeah. And
Love is very much like CJ Pro size.
Yeah. That's the example. Like, a lot of people compare him to Josh Adams. I like that you said pro size, because that's the one that I've been saying, because he may be built a lot like Josh, but his game is a lot more like CJ's. Josh was a running back. That was it. I feel like this kid, CJ, started his career at safety, played some slot receiver, had over 500 receiving yards, and then, of course, moved to running back and had 1,000 yards. So they just want him. And then if they don't get Richard Young, then he's your number 2 back, but he can still play other positions. So they definitely want Jeremiah Love. He recently visited Georgia. A lot of SEC schools are coming in on him. I think Notre Dame is in a good, really good position with him coming into the visit. It's going to be about closing. That's going to be the key. They've got to close on Jeremiah, because if they let this one, not if they let it, but like if they're not able to close and it starts going into the fall, and now Georgia and Alabama and some of these schools see their board shake out and like, okay, we need a running back. All of a sudden, the heat gets turned up on Jeremiah, and it's going to be a little tougher to get him into the class later. It's a lot easier to keep a kid in the class than it is to land him when he's uncommitted and those schools come calling. So, Sean,
last time Notre Dame had 2 running backs that Alabama has on their board on campus in the same.
Yeah, and I'm going to look at Jeremiah Love. I know that he's had some conversations. I don't know if I'll say this. It's definitely a kid that both Georgia wants both, or is definitely talking to both. And Alabama has offered Jeremiah Love. I know that. I don't know necessarily where he shakes out on their board, but still, you're talking about 2 backs with Bama offers and with Georgia offers, and Young and Jeremiah Love. Yeah. So with Love, Sean, that's one that I feel, that's one of the kids that I feel coming into the visit that Notre Dame leads for. You've talked to some folks about this. Where do you think Notre Dame stands with Jeremiah Love coming into this visit?
Yeah, I talked to my connect that is very familiar with not only Christian Gray, but also Jeremiah Love. And the way he was originally being recruited, I was told, man, it's going to be really difficult to get him that way, especially with the schools that are chasing him at the running back position. Since that changed, I reached back out and talked to my guy, and things have changed. Totally. Also, he's in track season competing against Christian Gray. And Christian Brothers dominates football, not too well in track, which is funny. And Christian Gray always jokes about it. But they've been talking about Notre Dame at these track meets. So it's at a position where I do believe his conversation has actually pushed Christian to possibly feel the way he's feeling right now. And Jeremiah has really come around to once again, the collaborative effort from speaking with Tommy Reeves, talking to Chancey Stuckey, talking to Dylan McCullough, talking to Marcus Freeman. Everybody's in, and he's really bought in to what Notre Dame is talking about. And like you said, this is closing time. This is closing time. It's like now, mentally, he knows he fits at Notre Dame. He's bought into the fact that he can be developed and reach all of his dreams and all of his goals at Notre Dame on and off the field. Now, it's about getting that feeling. I talked to a recruit recently, and he said, I know I can be successful at any school I have on my top list. He said, now it's about getting that feeling. And when you get that feeling, that's when you know. And the month of June is about this staff closing and making these guys get on campus and have that feeling, whatever it is, to make them go ahead and pull the trigger and say, Notre Dame is the place for me. And I think Jeremiah Love is very close to possibly having that type of experience and going ahead and committing to Notre Dame.
And that's why this visit is so important for him. Now, Richard Young's situation, Sean, basically it's going to be a lot about dominoes, because right now I would say that Alabama and Georgia are his top two schools. From everything that I've been able to gather about him, Alabama's been the perceived leader for a long time. But I think that part of this, we all as an industry need to make sure that with this particular young man that we kind of pump the brakes a little bit on our assumptions about who leads for him, right? Because there was a perception for a long time that if he doesn't pick Bama or Georgia, he's going to go to Ohio State.
Yeah.
Well, he's not even giving them an official. Basically, Notre Dame replaced Ohio State as his fifth official, which I love that. But he's going to Oklahoma the weekend of the first weekend, the 3rd to the 5th. He's going to Bama that next weekend. Then he leaves Bama, goes right home, and immediately comes back up to Notre Dame. So he's going to go from Tuscaloosa back home, and then that next day he's coming to Notre Dame. So 10 to 12, he'll be at Bama. 13 to 15, he's going to be at Notre Dame. 17th to 19th, he'll be at Georgia, and then he rounds things out at Oregon. Those are his 5 visits. Now, I don't know what his time frame is, but basically – when you look at Alabama, there's a lot of rumblings that they may be close to getting Cedric Baxter, who's another 5-star running back.
5-star, yeah.
And so you look at that, and then you say, Georgia's in on some big backs right now. And so you get in a situation where it's like, those are the two contenders. If they're out, all of a sudden, or they have a top back, like they would probably still recruit him. But if they have another top back, you start saying, okay, I feel a lot better about where Notre Dame would be going against Oklahoma and Oregon than I would be Georgia or Alabama. And so that's just the reality of it. And, that's kind of where they are. So he is one for me that I am definitely keeping my eyes open, Sean, to see kind of what shakes out at other positions. Oh, Georgia's Justice Haynes. That's another one.
Right.
Georgia's the perceived leader for Justice Haynes. So all of a sudden, if those dominoes start falling soon for those schools, now all of a sudden Notre Dame, who has a puncher's chance now, is in a much better position if those dominoes start to fall. If those dominoes don't fall, where Cedric Baxter is going to wait till December, January, or he picks somewhere else, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, or let's say Justice Haynes goes somewhere else, then it gets a little bit more challenging. But they're in it, and that's the key. They're in this.
And Rick, was that Dumb and Dumber the scene? And he says, "So you're saying there's a chance?
Telling me there's a chance? What would you say the odds are of you and I getting together?
Right,
1 in 1,000, more like 1 in 1,000,000.
Yes.
So you're telling me there's a chance? That's But I mean, but 2 weeks ago I just said, Sean, I don't even know why we're wasting time talking about this kid.
Right.
And now Dylan McCullough, has him down as and now Dylan McCullough has him on campus for an official visit, right? So you're in the game. You're in the game. At the end of the day, do I think they're going to get him? No, I don't. I think some dominoes have to fall their way for them to get him. But
you have to take the shot, right?
There you go.
And maybe you don't take it.
But if you don't get him, and closing out on Jeremiah Love is important no matter what. Like, Jeremiah Love is nobody's consolation prize for not getting Richard Young. Jeremiah Love is a guy that Notre Dame wants no matter what. They like him at running back. And so that's the one for me that's the more realistic one. But he's not a plan B. He's not if we don't get this guy. Yeah. This is a kid that Notre Dame has wanted in this class for some time, and they're going to have to be able to close on him in the month of June. Let's move on to receiver, Sean. This is going to be a big one because this is a very, very, very important position for Notre Dame. And losing Rodney Gallagher is something you can overcome, but you can't afford another miss. That's the key. You can't afford another miss. And so now you've got Ronan Hannafin coming on June 10th, Rico Flores coming in the weekend of June 10th, and then Jaden Greathouse the week after. Those are the three. That's the top of the board right now of realistic players.
Right.
They're still recruiting Tyler Williams. It's just I don't see that one happening. I have a hard time seeing that one happening. And he has not scheduled a visit to Notre Dame. I believe he now has all of his 5 officials set, and Notre Dame's not one of them. It is what it is.
Penn State kid right now.
Tyler Williams?
Penn State. Wait a minute. Am I mixing them up?
You're thinking of somebody else. Yeah, Tyler Williams is like looking at like Georgia, Clemson, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and then there's one other he's going to get to. But he's a guy that I look at and I say, it's just not – we've said this for a while. I just don't see that one happening. So it is about Hannafin, Rico, and Jaden Greathouse. I think you got to get 2 of these guys, if not all 3. Because if you don't get one of them, then all of a sudden to get to 4, you now kind of got to go to your – I don't want to say plan B guys because that comes off as disrespectful. But, you know, they're not the very, very top of the board guys. So, like, I look at like a Malik Elzy type of guy. Malik Elzy's not a plan B. He's a good football player. Notre Dame likes him. But I do think it's clear to me anyway that he is behind Hannafin, Rico, and Jaden Greathouse on the board. It's okay to say it's a good football player. It says how good the board is, but you want to get the guys from that top of the board. That's the key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know, yes, you're not getting Carnell Tate. You're not getting Tyler Williams. So now you didn't get Rodney Gallagher. So now all of a sudden you've got this is a very important month for Chancey Stuckey. We've talked a lot about the success he's had getting Notre Dame in the game for these kids. Now he's got to show us that he can close. And that's going to be the key. And the first guy on my list that they have to close on, they've got to convince that Ronan Hannafin that now's the time. Like, I know he wants to kind of see the process through, and he's visiting Clemson the week of the 3rd to 5th. He's planning on setting up a visit to Alabama later in the month of June. I know Oklahoma, Boston College, Nebraska, all those schools are really pushing to get him on campus. Notre Dame has to somehow, some way convince him that weekend that, dude, it's time.
Yeah.
It's time. It's time. We want you. We need you. We know you want to be here. We all know you. This is where you want to be. That's the perception. Let's make it happen, right? And you've been to Bama. You've been here. You've been there. Let's make this thing happen. You know where you want to be. And we need you in this class, right? We need you to help sell, you know, this program and this receiving core to others. So I think that's the first domino, because we know Rico's not committing till July 3rd. So I mean, you know, the closing there is a different deal. For me, with Ronan Hannafin, you have to try to convince him to not only commit to you, but to make it known, like, kind of now. He is one of those guys that I think, as of right now, we do not know of any kids that have a scheduled June commitment date. We don't have answers to that. I'm being honest with you. I'm not like, I know, but I can't tell you. We've told you. It's going to be some kids in early May. We knew Devin Houston and Selim Nabsher. We knew a kid was going to commit in late May, and Jayden Lamar. We don't have any scheduled June commitments. There will be some, I think, though.
Yeah.
And Ronan Hannafin, to me, has to be one of those guys. If you get Ronan Hannafin in the class, all of a sudden, I think that's to what you were referring to earlier, Sean. He could be the domino.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the funny thing. There's going to be a lot of people, some in the chat, others. I think our chat says, as I always say, our chat's more informed than the average Notre Dame fan. I think partly because they're smart people, but I think the fact that they are in this, you know, we inform them of things, but they also are thinkers. So I think there's a different impression of Ronan Hannafin on our chats than there is in the perception of the Notre Dame fans who aren't, you know, the diehard recruiting followers. Having said that, here's my question. Name me a receiver on the board, maybe other than Carnell Tate, maybe, who has a more impressive offer list than Ronan Hannafin. Name me another receiver on the board who Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, USC have all offered recently, you know, who has Clemson, Alabama, Notre Dame as his June visits planned, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a key. And so they've got to convince him, because he is a very talented player, but I also think he is the beginning of that domino. That's my opinion, Sean, on Ronan Hannafin.
Yeah, my mistake on Tyler Williams. I was thinking about the kid Marquise Williams and Notre
Yes, the
Dame
running
was taking
back.
on early.
Because he was a kid that dropped a top 7 recently
Yeah,
and included Notre Dame. That's why the
yeah,
confusion is there. Although I
yeah.
don't think Notre
So
Dame is
no,
on him right now.
right. So Ronan Hannafin, like you said, is that domino. The 3 names you mentioned, 2 out of 3 is a must, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
any combination of the 2 out of the 3 that you mentioned between Hannafin, Greathouse, and Rico Flores, you're fine with, because that would bring you to 3.
If they get Hannafin and Flores,
Hannafin and Flores, you have Braylon
okay,
James.
3, yeah.
So that's
Mhm.
3, and you still probably will be looking to add another,
Jaden Greathouse, right? Exactly.
right? And hopefully Greathouse jumps in. If he doesn't, and you only get 3 out of those 3 total out of the
Mhm.
guys that you've gone after, then you have guys like Elsie
Right,
that could possibly be part of the class, or you
right,
have some other guys that go into
right.
the fall, and you continue to fight for them, and you get them on for official visits in the fall. So the wide receiver class, I still like the direction it's going in.
Yeah, they
I
got to close,
absolutely,
Sean.
they
That's the
got to
key.
close. That's all. I love the direction. I love Chancey Stuckey and the work he's put in. And now, you just have to have the ability, like you said, to get these guys on signing on the dotted line and committed to your program.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would argue that going into the visits, I would say that the 2 receivers they have the best chance for of that group of 3 right now is Ronan Hannafin and Jaden Greathouse.
Greathouse. I agree.
Yeah,
I
I think,
agree.
and that's going to be the key. And I think that Hannafin committing in, if Hannafin can commit the week in between the weekend of the 10th and the weekend of the 17th,
Yeah.
then I think that increases the odds that you can then convince Jaden Greathouse to jump on board. Because here's the thing you're selling to them: hey guys, we're trying to get Dante Moore. We're trying to present the class so there was a lot of thought that Dante would be the guy, the ringleader to a great offensive class. Well, this staff is saying, fine, you don't want to jump on board yet. Let's go get that great offensive class and then use that to get you. And I think that's the key. And if you can get Braylon James, who's a top 100 recruit, Jaden Greathouse, who's a top 100 recruit, and then if you can add Ronan Hannafin and be like, look at this dude's offer list. Look at who wants this kid. You can start to say, oh, and by the way, we have a top 100 caliber tight end as well.
Yeah.
Then, and we'll get into the offensive line next. Then all of a sudden, you've got a 4-star running back. If you get Jeremiah Love, you've got another top 100 player at running back. Now all of a sudden, it's like, hey, Dante, it's like the scene at the end of Draft Day. One of my guilty pleasures is the movie Draft Day. But there's the scene of like, hey, the Browns are ready to roll. We just need we need a new head. We just need the right man, leading it. You can say, hey, look, Dante, this offense is ready to roll. We just need the right guy, pulling the trigger, and that would be him. So I think those 2 guys are important, not only for the receiver class, but also to continue to present to Dante Moore, like, dude, we've already got something rocking and rolling here. Imagine what we could do with you, in the class. And so I think that's what the selling point would be. And then I think here's the other part is if you can convince them to jump on board and you still want Rico Flores, that's actually a really good selling point to him, in my opinion, because Ohio State's kind of sitting there like they want Cardinal Tate, they want Brandon Ennis, and they want Noah Rogers. If they feel come in June that they're going to get all 3 of those guys, they're not going to, from what I'm told from some sources, they're not going to take Rico. Georgia's a little bit uncertain right now if they're going to take Rico. If Notre Dame can say to him, hey, man, we think we're going to get these 2 guys. Look, we just got those 2 guys, and we got Braylon James. And you know what? We still want you. I think that's a great selling point. So I think those 2 guys, again, you talked about the dominoes, Sean, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where they are. So if I were to predict now, I would say I feel good about Notre Dame getting Hannafin and Greathouse. With Rico, he's never been on campus, so I'm not comfortable making a prediction per se, or even talk about where it's trending until he gets on campus. He may think right now he loves Notre Dame, get on campus, but this isn't for me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He may not think Notre Dame's a place for him, get on campus and be like, this is the place for me.
Yeah.
So we got to see how it goes. But Hannafin, they've got to close on, and Greathouse, they got to close on. There's no question about it.
Hannafin would be a fantastic get.
Yes.
I think people are really sleeping on this kid.
Yep.
We watch his film. You've had discussions with him. Ryan has done a great job, talking to him during his recruiting cycle. This kid is amazing. He is a gamer,
Mm-hmm.
and he can play all three positions. That's what I love. You can put him outside, you can put him inside, you can give him the ball on the sweeps.
Yeah.
Like, he's just a gamer.
People are sleeping on that kid for some obvious reasons, and I think the biggest one being that he's from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I had this conversation with my guy Smitty, and he's just like, "Why? He just doesn't buy the kid's hype because he's from Massachusetts." And I'm, my stance is always like, "Look, dude, if you're a 4-4, you're a 4-4. It doesn't matter who you're playing against.
Doesn't matter who you're playing against.
Your talent doesn't determine your ability. It has more to do with the ability to evaluate it. Like, it's hard to evaluate it, but that's kind of what you get paid to do." And so I think that he's a very good football player, and it's not going to be a needle mover from a perception standpoint with fans, but this kid's a really good football player, and people are sleeping on his athleticism. I would argue him and Braylon James
sides too, Brian.
What's that?
Like when you watch his defensive film.
Oh yeah. Well, Bama wants him as a safety.
He wants him
safety
come
rover type. Yeah. Nick Saban is personally recruiting him as a defensive player. Right. And Clemson and Ohio and Notre Dame are both recruiting him as a wide receiver. And so it's just kind of like that says a lot about it. But like him and Braylon James are the two. If they were to get a class of Braylon, Hannafin, Greathouse, and Rico, him and Braylon James and Ronan Hannafin are the two most explosive athletes on that group. And it's not really close.
Yeah, it's not really run after catch. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's O-line. Obviously, Monroe Freeling and Charles Jagasaw is the key, right? Yeah. That's the key to an elite O-line class. Mm-hmm. Getting one of them in June or July is a must. I think the guy that Notre Dame has to – I just don't feel comfortable that Monroe Freeling's going to commit, even though I think they're the lead. I really think he is enjoying the recruiting process.
Yeah.
Which is the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause about landing him, because Notre Dame doesn't often land O-linemen late in the process.
Yeah.
I think the only guy I really remember them getting that panned out that they wanted early. Obviously, they got Nick Martin late, but that's because they moved on Nick Martin late. Ronnie Stanley is probably the last guy. Quentin Nelson, I think he committed late, so it doesn't happen often. Yeah. But the guys that they have gotten have been good players. It's just they don't tend to get those guys late. But Charles Jagasaw is a guy they got to close on. And the other part of it, too, is Elijah Page visits that weekend of 3rd to 5th. There are some other schools that I think are in a better place than Notre Dame right now, but I think that weekend could be a game changer because even though he's not working out at the camp, Notre Dame is going to have Zach Martin, Nick Martin, Liam Eichenberg, Aaron Banks, Robert Hainsey, and Mike Golick Jr. all on campus that weekend working at the lineman camp. So even though he won't be participating in the camp because you can't on an official visit,
right?
That he's going to be bumping into Zach Martin, Nick Martin, Robert Hainsey, Liam Eichenberg, Aaron Banks. He is. And so I think that's going to help too. But he's one that I think that right now, I don't think they're first for him. I think they're second, maybe even third for him. But this is a visit where you could quickly change that, because I think he's very intrigued by what Harry Hiestand can offer him. And I've also been told that Tosh Baker has taken well to Harry Hiestand's coaching.
Nice.
And that's going to be huge too, because they're former teammates, or they come from the same high school.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be a very, very important piece.
Elijah Page looks at Harry Hiestand and says, "Sir, how are you going to develop me?" And Harry just turns around.
Interesting question. Let me introduce you to some former 1st and 2nd round draft picks.
Absolutely.
As he's standing in front of the Joe Moore Award, you know what I mean? So, yes, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. All right, so he's important. That's a key. Now, my understanding is that if Elijah Page wants to come, he's a take. I mean, they'll take 5.
Yeah.
They want 5 in the class, but they're not going to force 5. It has to be the right 5. Joe Otting will be on campus that weekend as well, but he's actually going to be camping at Notre Dame. It's not going to be an official visit, and it's more of an evaluation visit for both of them.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about him more after the fact, seeing how the visit goes and see if Notre Dame pushes for him. They love his film. They love his athleticism and power, but it's just more about the frame. really getting a chance to see him move around, see that frame, and those type of
And
things.
for those that might not fully understand when you say he'll be camping and what's the
Mhm.
difference than the visit,
Yeah.
we know there are some kids that are
Right.
looking for an offer. They're going to be
Right.
doing a mixture. It'll be a
Right.
visit and a
Right. But it's an
semi-workout,
unofficial visit, right?
unofficial
Like there's
visit.
a tight end from Illinois
Right.
that you talk to that's gonna be on campus that weekend, who's a 2024 kid.
Mhm.
He's gonna be camping, but he's also, again, it's gonna be a visit. They're gonna
Visit.
show him
Right.
around. And Notre Dame is having their camps that weekend. So like their lineman camp will be around then. So it's gonna be a important weekend for Elijah Page. So they got to make a move on him because I think he's a natural tackle, athletic kid. Has a lot more room to grow physically than Monroe Freeling and Absher and Jagasol, guys like that, and Sam Pendleton.
Yeah.
But the athleticism is there, the length is there. He's a very talented kid, and I know the staff is very high on him. So I'm confident that if he wanted to come, my understanding is he's not a kid that they would say, "Oh, well, we like you, but we've got to wait on a couple other." They would just take him and say, "But we're still going to take Monroe and Jagasol. We like both of those guys too."
Yeah.
And I think it would have a greater impact on some other linemen, right? It wouldn't have any impact on Jagasol or Freeling other than, hey, spots are filling up. But they want all three of those guys. My understanding is, and so they would take all three. Jagasol is the interesting one, Sean, and I'll let you speak to this one because you're a lot closer to him and his situation. They got to close on him. I have felt for a long time, you have felt for a long time that Notre Dame is the clear leader here. It's just about what do they got to do to close the deal on him? I think that
Yeah.
would be my question, and I think you can kind of provide some answers to it.
Well, this kid is a kid that really his recruitment has been pushed along by his head coach, his high school coach, and his father. His father travels frequently. He's an international businessman. His mother, is a church musician who hasn't had a lot of time to be a part of his recruitment. His initial visit, his father accompanied him, and after that, his high school coach, they kind of gave him the go ahead to lead up the recruitment, and he has been the one that has been bringing him to his visits at Notre Dame. So his high school coach, along with his father and CJ at this point, are tremendously in love with Notre Dame. And I wrote an article, I think you posted it last week, where, in talking with his mother and getting the official time that he will be making a visit to Notre Dame, I asked her about what CJ has shared with me with Notre Dame feeling like home, like no other school feels more like home to him and what he's been used to than Notre Dame. And she says, yeah, that's what Charlie tells me, and she says, I'm looking forward to seeing, what he's been talking about. And, I've talked to the coaches over the phone, but I've yet to meet them. And she's like, I'm looking forward to doing that. So for me, Notre Dame really has to connect the dots and make the mother see what the coach has been talking about, what Charles has been talking about. The coach has been raving about the communication between the coaches and the players. He's a coach. That's what he's watching each and every time he comes to Notre Dame. And every time he's left a visit, he raves about how well they communicate and deliver messages to their players and the relationship between the players and the coaching staff. So everything lines up for him to go ahead and make that decision. His original timeline was August before their season starts. Their first game is that second weekend in August. They're going to start practice as soon as he gets done with his visits. They go directly into preparation for that season. I really don't see it getting to August, in my opinion. I think when he gets back, his family and his coach are really going to make the impression upon him. Look, I know you said you don't mind waiting, but we don't want to drag this
If you
out.
know, you know. Let's
If
do
you
it.
know, you know.
Right.
We don't want this to be a distraction going into the season. It's well chronicled, the turmoil surrounding that football program and what they've gone through. And,
And he's their leader.
And he's their leader.
Right.
So absolutely. So you can possibly look for a July decision coming from Charles Jagasol, if not the earliest parts of August. I'm talking like August 1st, 2nd, 3rd, because once again, they definitely don't want to get into the season that second weekend and have to still deal with a decision when at this point, from my conversations with him, is pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's what his feelings are about Notre Dame and the coaching staff, and everything just seems to fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They got to close on him. He's the guy they got to get,
to.
in my view.
They
Have to. And then now if you feel, okay, you like where you're at, you've got him, you've got Absher, you've got Pendleton, you're like, okay, you can be patient at that point in time with Monroe Freeling. And then you can work on trying to close with Elijah Page and kind of see how things are there. So he is a very, very important piece. He's, of all the linemen, he's the one they have to get now, in my opinion. They have to be able to convince him now, like, hey, this is the move you need to make, in my view. Let's go front seven, Sean, because there's two kids that are going to be on campus that I think Notre Dame has a chance to close on this summer.
Okay.
Now, we dropped a little bit of intel on Samuel Mpemba potentially changing his visit date. Won't get into that right now. You can check that out on the message board. But the reality is he's probably not deciding anytime soon. So we're going to focus on the two kids. I think they have a shot at closing on this summer because that's kind of the premise of the whole this. Defensive line-wise, it's Jaden Osbury. It's Jason Moore, and then linebacker, it's Jaden Osbury.
Yeah.
I think these are two very, very important pieces because to me, you get those two and you've met all your needs in the front seven recruiting in an impressive fashion. And then at that point in time, Samuel Mpemba becomes the sweetest cherry on top of the sweetest cake you've ever had in your life.
Man.
That's what that would be.
Yeah.
And so I think Notre Dame is in the pole position for both coming into the visit. Now, let me rephrase that. They, I believe, are in pole position coming into the visit period, not just the Notre Dame visit, but the visit, all the visits.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, I think both can be swayed by other programs. And even though I think Notre Dame leads, it's not a surefire, no-brainer. They're picking Notre Dame thing. I think, however, with great visits, Notre Dame could be very hard to beat with both guys and could convince both guys to make a decision. I expect Jason Moore to make a decision this summer. Nothing is confirmed, but we expect that. I don't know if Jaden Osbury has decided he wants to commit this summer. I think he's a lot of times, Sean, really smart, high intellect kids tend to be super thoughtful. Yeah. Some of them, that thoughtfulness leads to, I want to get this over with now. Some of them, it's like, I want to maybe go through the season, do this, do that. I want to see how Golden in person. I want to see how the defense looks like and all that kind of stuff. And I could see that happening too. But I think with a great visit, and you look at the guys that are going to be on campus that weekend for Notre Dame as well, he's going to be on campus with Devin Houston, Adon Schuler. I think Drake Bowen's going to try to be on campus that weekend for both of those guys. So Jaden Osbury, Jason Moore, Christian Gray, all going to be on campus the same weekend. There's going to be a lot of conversation about, okay, what's the move? This needs to be the move. You're going to have some committed kids on campus. Jason Moore is very close with Devin Houston. Devin Houston is all over Jason Moore. You're going to have some Notre Dame commits on campus that weekend. It's closing time for those guys, Sean. I mean, that's going to be the key. It's time to close on those two guys. And Jason Moore, I feel more confident in right now in regards to closing the summer. But I really think another knockout visit for Jaden Osbury could lead to that. And as you know, Sean, everybody in this chat knows, that is one of my absolute favorite players in this class. I don't know what it is about him. He's not like my number one ranked player. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. Because it's different between that's the most talented player in the class. I mean, that's Keon Keeley, and it's not close.
Not even close, yeah.
And Drake Bowen even has, more size, more explosiveness. I mean, it's just – there's just something about that kid that when I watch him play, I'm like, gosh, I love that kid as a player. And then you hear people talk about him as a young man, and you're like, yep, okay, yep, even more, highly intellectual, really smart, thoughtful, just exactly. He is a Notre Dame kid.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to draw up a linebacker in a lab, the only thing that you would want to change about Jaden Osbury is maybe add a couple inches and about 15 pounds.
That's it.
But everything else about him, instincts, athleticism, power, playmaking ability, off the field traits. Reminds me a lot of Dalen Hayes as a young man. Like, you know what I mean? Like, real thoughtful, really intellectual, really thinks about things beyond football.
Yeah.
He reminds me a lot of Dalen Hayes as a young man, but he's a completely different type of player than Dalen Hayes. But this is the kind of kid that you're like, you've got to get this kind of kid. And take my pettiness away about beating Brian Kelly. It's not even about that. As I said the other, if Brian Kelly would have gone to Florida or USC instead of LSU, it wouldn't change my feeling at all about Jaden Ausberry.
Yeah.
That just adds a little bit of, sweetness to him. But it's really about this. I just love this kid as a player. And I think it's important to be able to go down to Louisiana and get another top player and continue the momentum they had with guys like a Jerry Tillery and the success they had. Because the last couple of kids from Louisiana didn't pan out the way that you had hoped.
Yeah.
With Lawrence Keys and Michael Young. So hopefully they can kind of get back on track with Jaden Ausberry. That's going to be an interesting one.
Well, I'm proud of you, Brian. And if you're not going to be petty, allow me to reintroduce myself, because I am going to be petty. I do want Jaden Ausberry, strictly because, not strictly, but one of the main reasons is, yes, go get a Louisiana kid out of Louisiana and pull him to Notre Dame when that guy just went down to Baton Rouge. Yes, let's go do it right now, just to prove that things have changed at Notre Dame. It's not like it hasn't been done before. You just chronicle the guys, like Jerry Tillery and some of the other guys, Lawrence Keys, that came from the area. Haven't worked out. Michael Young actually went to Cincinnati, had a pretty good collegiate career, and is continuing. But this kid is, you watch him, and if you don't think about his measurables and you just watch him, you say to yourself, like, yo, this guy commands the field.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he commands the field. He's the type of player that one day offense is going to say, okay, where is he lining up? Offensive coordinators are going to wonder, okay, where is he? Where is he coming from? Because that's how dominant he is on film. He's not the biggest guy.
Right.
So he's not going to stand out. But all of a sudden, out of the pack, you see him coming out of nowhere and making a tackle, and it's like, yo, okay, yes, I see why he is who he is. And like you said, when you talk to people that know him and you find out the type of kid he is, and his makeup, and you say to yourself, okay, he's a kid that's going to believe in 4 for 40.
Yep.
He understands what it means.
Yep.
And he has foresight to see, like, this is what I want for myself.
And it's one of the reasons you would get him. I mean,
Absolutely.
that would be, if it was just about football, he's probably not looking at Notre Dame.
He's probably not looking. Yeah.
He'd stay in the South just because it'd stay closer to home. There's some good defensive football teams close to where he's from.
You
right?
think so?
I mean,
yeah.
He's one of those kids that's looking at a whole lot more than just that. And that's another reason why I think he's a Notre Dame kid. And I feel the same way about Jason Moore.
Absolutely.
Catholic school kid, doesn't necessarily, I mean, if you don't see a whole lot from Jason Moore on social media, he's not like one of those kids like trying to build, a social media following to up his likes and his followers and all that, so he can turn it into some big NIL deal. He's a kid that's like, look, I want to get a great education. That's why his brother went to Villanova. It wasn't just basketball.
Yeah.
Right. He went from a Catholic school to another Catholic school. I think Jason will make a similar move. Comes from a good family, and I think he's a great Notre Dame fit. And we've said that for a long time. But they got to close, because I think he likes Ohio State as well. I think he likes Michigan. I think he likes Penn State. I think he likes all those schools. I think Notre Dame leads right now. But if you don't have a great visit with him in June and those other schools knock it out of the park, then all of a sudden maybe you could see that lead slip. So that's why I say both of these kids, I think Notre Dame is in the top position for now. But it's going to require strong visits in June to maintain that and then close. That's going to be the key with those two.
And you know what is impactful? And I actually had a conversation with my dad. And, he was just asking me about the recruiting class. And I was talking to him about Jason Moore. And I was like, yeah, his brother played in Villanova. He's the kid that got hurt right before the Final Four. And he said, well, that's good for you guys. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, for him to watch his brother get hurt. He's like, yo, he knows there's more to it than football. Yeah. He's looking at it like how close you can come to losing that opportunity, your athleticism. Like, it can happen in a blink of an eye, in a moment. Like, the game was almost over, and it happened. So that bodes well for Notre Dame. And I said, I guess you're right. If you're looking at it as a family, that is a point for a parent to say, see, this is what I'm talking about, guys. This is why you go to a place like Notre Dame, where it's bigger than just going to play football. It impacts the rest of your life. So I was like, I didn't even look at it like that, how his brother's injury could actually impact his recruiting I was like, yo, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
I mean, you wish it didn't have to come to that,
Right.
but
No,
it
you wouldn't
happened.
wish that.
It happened, and that's
Yeah.
something that, can be like, you know what, I need to really make sure that I think this thing through a little bit. So,
Yeah.
so we'll see. They have to close on those two guys. That's going to be a big key this spring. And then, so let's finish off with the secondary. Obviously, Caleb Downs is on campus. Micah Tease is on campus. The visit with Caleb Downs, I mean, I think this is probably your last crack at it. I think this is your last crack at Caleb Downs. I still think Bama is ahead for him. I still think Georgia is right there with Bama. I think those are the two schools for him. I think Caleb likes Notre Dame a lot. What people have to understand is most of these kids, when they pick a school, unless it's a school they grew up rooting for, it's not like this team is great and I don't like any other teams. They like a lot of those teams. And I think Caleb likes Notre Dame a lot. I just think right now it's not enough to get him to commit.
Yeah.
But this is going to be his like fourth or fifth time on campus. So clearly there's some interest there. We'll see how it goes. This is your last chance with that. Micah Tease is an interesting one. I don't have a lot to say about Micah Tease right now because his recruitment is a little bit of a mystery to me. School's getting in and out, what position he's going to play. I mean, a lot of that's going to be kind of hammered out this June. I think USC and Oklahoma. What's that, Sean?
I just never thought he would leave home.
Yeah, and I think right now if he did, there's a chance he may pick USC instead of Oklahoma, right? And then there was a time when Oklahoma seemed out. Now they're back in. It's just, the whole thing is just I've never felt great about that one. Yeah. I know Ryan feels better about Notre Dame's odds than I do. I just don't feel great about that one. The visit's going to tell us a lot, so I don't want to get too much into detail on that.
Yeah.
Same with Caleb Downs. There's two kids going to be on campus, however, in back-to-back weekends that are must-gets for Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. So we'll go chronologically. Christian Gray's on campus the 10th to the 12th. This is sort of your things are trending in the right direction. You've got to close it out now. You've got to close the deal, right? This is he's going to be on campus to LSU, I believe, this summer as well. Let me just look that up real quick, just to make sure the specific dates of when he's going to be on campus. But I know he's going to be there. I think he's going to Ohio State as well.
Yes, he is.
For an official visit. And I think Michigan is going to get an official visit from him as well, correct? I think those are the four he's going to make.
Yep.
So the Notre Dame visit will not be his last visit. He's going to make another one. Actually, he does not have Michigan on there yet, at least that I can see here. He's got LSU the weekend of the 3rd to the 5th, the first weekend of June. Then Notre Dame's the next weekend. Then USC is the weekend after that. And then Ohio State is there the final weekend. So you're going to have to, it's going to be I think Notre Dame is trending in the right direction. I think that Notre Dame has a chance to close that thing out when he gets on campus, but I'm not going to lie to you, Sean. The fact that he has Ohio State coming after the visit to Notre Dame makes me a little nervous. I'm not going to lie to you on that one. So
yeah, but it's interesting that the first two
are
probably
his top two.
The leaders in the eyes of most people.
Right.
So you would think most kids save those schools for the last, and some kids just, invert.
Yeah. So, and I think the case could say, look, these are my top two schools. Let me see them first, and then see if those other schools stack up.
Right.
I think that's maybe the way you could look at it as well. So you've got to close on them. Then you've got to weather the storm the next 2 weekends. And I think to your point, though, I do think the fact that if you look at it compared to when they follow LSU, it could probably be more impactful than having the last overall. It's like you were there right after LSU. Like he's not gonna have a whole lot of time to let LSU sink in before he's on Notre Dame's campus. And I think that's an important piece. They got to close on him, Sean. He commits July 4th is when he will make his announcement. So a decision will most likely be made before then. That's normally how it goes. But he will make his decision public on July 4th is where he is right now. The next weekend, you get Micah Bell. If they can get Christian Gray and then Micah Bell, because Christian Gray to me is an interesting situation because a lot of people talk about his speed and his track times, and I don't see that speed on film. What I love about Christian Gray is he's long, he's smooth. He knows how to play the position. I view him as more of an instincts player as opposed to a speed guy. If I'm wrong about his speed, then he goes way up as a prospect. Like for me, he's like a top 150 guy, right? Yeah. Like I just don't see top 100 guy because I don't see that speed yet. But if the speed is there and I'm wrong on his speed, he jumps definitely up into the top 100 because he has the length, the strength, the tackling ability. He's a very high IQ football player. He's very smooth and fluid. He's very, his understanding of how to run routes is impressive because he plays offense as well. But like he'll run routes for a receiver. I mean, that's an expression that we use. It's part of that mental IQ that I love about the kid. And if the speed catches up to that, then he's going to be really, really good. Micah Bell is the exact opposite. He still has a lot to learn about playing defense, but holy moly, that kid can
raw
run.
and talented.
But man, he can run.
Yes,
and he's got some instincts, right?
Yeah.
Like he knows how to play the game. It's just technically he's super raw.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I don't care. No coach worth a grain of salt should care about a kid's technique because that's what you get paid 6 figures to do.
Right.
Is to teach him that. You can't teach 10-4 in the 100-meter dash like Micah Bell has. And it shows up on the football field. That's the thing. It shows up on the football field. This kid is explosive. You've got those kids back to back. Christian Gray knows Notre Dame. It's about closing. He's been here several times. Micah Bell has never been to Notre Dame, I don't believe. This is kind of a meet and greet and a finish all in one visit. Those can be a little harder to do, but he's got a lot of Braylon James in him, in my opinion. Smart kid, good academics, just Notre Dame fit. He needs to get up on campus to confirm that.
Yeah.
And that's what that weekend's going to be all about. So that's going to be a very, very interesting one, Sean, because I think Notre Dame is in a good place, but I just don't want to get too locked into that stance until we see that kid decide. Because I believe his brother is the one whose brother went to Georgia? I believe. I could be wrong on that.
You may be right.
But but he seems to like Notre Dame quite a bit.
With the Christian Gray situation, it's very interesting because we know at this point, we know what it may come down to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Comfort level, relationship with a defensive coach that goes back history, and the history of development at that position, at that particular school, at LSU. Those are the things that stand out, right? Notre Dame, change in culture. Already like Notre Dame. I like them even more with the new head coach and a new coaching staff, right? No Mike Mickens, have a relationship with him. Might not be as strong as the relationship with the defensive back coach at LSU.
There's nothing you can do about that. He was a kid's high school coach. Right.
But once again, here you go. What school fits who you are and who your family is?
Right.
I tell you all the time, a vast majority of the time, because of how involved I am with youth in ministry, I spend 10 to 15% of my conversation with Christian Gray talking about ministry and his involvement with his youth group and what they do and what they have planned over the summer. So you're talking about a kid that's deciding. This is where his anxiousness comes in. He's like, I'm nervous about my decision. Because he understands if I'm just going to decide about football, then I probably would lean one way. But looking at my total life and what my family feels, because they know what's best for me and where I fit, now it's like, okay, I don't want to disappoint. If I make this decision, I disappoint somebody I have a really good relationship with.
There's a lot of kids I've talked to in this class that are having that problem.
Yes,
there are, and I don't think people have under There's a kid I've talked to who has a really close relationship with the head coach of another school. And he just loves the guy. He knows he doesn't want to go there. He just doesn't want to tell the guy no.
Yeah.
There's another kid that's going to come to Notre Dame that just the reason he's still letting people recruiting him is because he just doesn't want to say no.
Yeah.
Because there's coaches you have to understand that it's hard for some of these kids because sometimes I went through this one time, Sean, when I was recruiting at a much smaller level, but I was recruiting this running back from Virginia. And from Woodbridge Academy in Virginia, I loved him. We were a 2-back thing. We were fullback. He was a fullback. He was a fullback that carried the football. Loved the kid, but he was a phenomenal student. And it was down to us and Johns Hopkins. Well, I'm sorry, Muhlenberg's a good college, but it ain't Johns Hopkins,
Hopkins,
And so I took it as long as I could take it. And he calls me one day and he starts crying. because he didn't want to tell me no.
Yeah.
Right. But I was like, dude, you're going to Johns Hopkins. Like, I get it, you know,
Right.
but like he knew that Johns Hopkins was the right place for him, but he didn't want to tell our staff no because he'd built such a good relationship with us.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's part of the process. I mean, that's part of it. And that's why sometimes these things can take a little bit longer than you'd expect. And I think that's true for Christian Gray, and that's true for other players as well. I wonder if they're able to convince him to commit that weekend, Sean. I'm very curious because like what happens is even if a kid doesn't go public, they start telling other commits about it. They start telling other recruits about it. You know, if he were, let's just say he were to pick Notre Dame, right? That weekend. Let's say he silently commits Notre Dame that weekend.
Yeah.
He'd probably get on the phone and call Micah Bell and be like, hey man, let's do this.
Yeah.
And I think that helps. Or the Notre Dame staff will tell Micah Bell, like, listen, just so you know, we think we're going to get Christian Gray on July 4th. You're our 1-2 punch, right?
Yeah.
But we need two corners, and once he picks, we may have to turn up the heat on somebody else because we need to know what's going on. So it gets back to that whole domino thing
and
we talked about.
His decision would go a long way to retaining Peyton Bowen.
Right.
People might not realize that. Like the trio, I call them the gaming trio. Peyton Bowen, Drake Bowen, and Christian Gray. Like that's all they do is game together constantly and talk constantly. So to get all three of those guys would go a long way. And because you've been talking about, man, look, we got to keep Peyton Bowen in the class. We got to keep him in the class. And that would definitely help.
So let's kind of go through this, Sean, where we kind of predict where Notre Dame will be by the end of July. So let's go through it. Let's start at running back. I predict they'll have 2 in the class by then. They've already have 1, and Jay Lamar. Obviously, I think they'll get 2. I don't see them getting a second back. Like I don't see them getting a third back right now. We'll see how the visit goes with Richard Young, but I just don't see that right now.
Yeah.
Receiver, I think by the end of July they have 2 more in the class with Braylon James.
I agree with that.
I think they get at least 1 more offensive lineman. I'm not comfortable enough to say they'll have 2 for sure. Got to see how the visit goes with Elijah Page, and I just don't get the feeling that Monroe Freeling's looking to make a decision anytime soon. Maybe that changes. Because remember, going into last June, Tobias Merriweather had talked about waiting until December to decide.
Right.
And then once he visited, it was like pretty soon after that, I was like, okay, it's done deal. D-line, I think they'll get 1 more. Linebacker, I think they'll get 1 more. And I think they'll get 2 secondary guys. That's the one I think is probably the bigger thing. I think they'll get 2 secondary guys by the end of July. So I think they'll have 8 more guys. That's a lot. Yeah. I think 5 to 8 is the range of public. We're talking public commitments.
Right.
By end of July. I think they'll have, and I think they could end up getting 3 receivers because it wouldn't shock me if they got 3. I still need to see what Ohio State does with Rico Flores. I think Rico wants to go to Ohio State. I just don't think he has the green light to pick Ohio State right now.
Yeah.
That's where it's at for me. So, and I always get nervous about kids like that because what if he picks Notre Dame now because Ohio State doesn't take him and Ohio State misses out on
fall back? Yeah.
Right. So it always makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
So you could see it jump up to 3 receivers because one of them, Rico's the only kid that's guaranteed to make a decision that we know is going to make a decision before the end of July. He's going to commit July 3rd. So that's where I'm at, Sean, with those numbers. Any disagreements there?
No one agreed. Originally, I think I said like 18 and 19 when we started discussing the topic for today. And I think they could get to 18, 19 by middle of July. And you were like, I think they'll get more.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. Right.
By end of July. I thought they'd get more by the end of July.
Yeah. I'm like, okay. And now listening back, discussing it this week.
Right.
I definitely will probably land on 20.
Because you say 5 in your head, I say 5, right? Like, I've met 4 or 5 more guys. Right. But then you go through the guys that are on campus and where things are in the recruitment. Like, yeah, dude, it could end up being more than 5. I think 5 is that. I'll say 5's got to be the minimum.
Right.
It's got to be the minimum.
Right.
If they don't get more than 5 by the end of July, that there's going to be some problems.
Yeah.
There's going to be some problems. And there's going to be some issues. There's some positions you're going to have to kind of start over at if you're less than 5. And I would even say 5 makes me a little bit nervous. right?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at right now. Sean, that's the recruiting breakdown. Let's get to the team aspect of it.
Let's get to it.
And the topic is, and we'll be somewhat brief with this one, is there is a lot of, we talked a lot in the past, you and I, about the new staff and the expectations and the pressure on the new staff. But what we're not talking about is the returners could ultimately be the difference between this being a good football team that's 10-2, 11-1, and a football team that's got a chance to play for a championship, which is the standard at Notre Dame, right? And we said that last week. And when you look at it, it's because it's not a long list. Because what the original conversation when Sean and I talked earlier this week was, okay, which one has the most pressure or has to do the best? And we're like, yeah, I mean, they all have to. Like, as we talked, there's like we can't pick one. Like, it's Tommy Rees, it's Mike Mickens, it's Chris O'Leary.
Right.
You can't pick just one, right? You've got to have all three of them, because if Rees does well but Mickens and O'Leary don't, or one of them two don't, then that hurts your team's not going to be as good.
Right.
If the two defensive guys do well but Rees doesn't, then you're not going to be good enough on offense to beat the best teams on your schedule. They all have a lot of pressure on them, and so it's almost as if, like, I'm assuming success from more of the returners. I mean, the new guys at times than the returners, and I think part of it is because on defense, the returning coaches are at the positions where there's the biggest question marks about the talent, and the proven talent is more of what I'd like to say, not so much the talent, because I think corner has a lot of talent.
Yeah.
You had Coach Mickens on your show recently. I think there's a lot of talent at corner. It's not a lot of proven talent. And I'd say the same thing at safety, because the two most proven safeties among the returners at safety are not in your top three in regards to just pure athleticism and talent. Brandon Joseph has a ton of experience, but not at Notre Dame and in this defense. So I think the two DB coaches, Sean, have a lot of pressure on them. Mike Mickens, Chris O'Leary has to get even more out of that group than he did at the end of last year. And I thought one of the most underrated coaching jobs of anyone on the staff last year was what Chris O'Leary did after Kyle Hamilton went down.
Absolutely.
They were better after Kyle went down than they were before. That's not because Kyle went down. It just speaks to the way that he was able to get them to prepare down the stretch against some teams that had some decent offenses. And so I thought that was impressive. They got exposed a little bit in the bowl game, but I think that had a lot to do with you were putting guys in positions that they just shouldn't have been in.
Yeah.
You had no choice. That's who you had.
Right.
Well, you've got Ramon Henderson going into year 2 at safety. Xavier Watts goes into year 2 at safety. Now you bring back Brandon Joseph, who you've had some interesting claims on, and I don't disagree with you, although others might, about his impact of the safety. So he's got to get that group going. But Mike Mickens especially is a guy that's a little bit, I don't want to say I don't know if the spotlight is brightest on him. I think that's still Tommy Rees. But he is a very important position, because he has a potential star in Cam Hart that he has to get to play like a star, right? He's got to help get Cam get to that next level. Now, I've talked to some sources. Cam is down in Florida working out right now. The players return June 5th for summer school. I had a couple people reach out to me that know some of the players that are also down there, and they're like, the responses are like, people are like, this is not the same Cam Hart that we knew before. He is absolutely just a man possessed right now, like super hungry. I think part of it is because what's happening on their schedule. He's had some interesting words about USC and some of these other schools, and it's like, okay, I got Jackson Smith and Jigba, I got Jordan Addison and Mario Williams, I got the Clemson receivers, I got Jordan I got trying to think some of these other kids on the list, Zay Flowers, right, from BC. Josh Downs from North Carolina. Like, there's some dudes at receiver on the Notre Dame schedule, and Cam knows that there's an opportunity in front of me not only to help my football team win, but if I can lock these dudes down, I get my chance to go out and be a high draft pick, right?
Yeah.
And he is working out like a man possessed. Now, Coach Mick's got to take him to that next level. But the bigger task is, because even if Cam just kind of is a slightly better version of himself from last year, it's still a pretty darn good football player.
Right.
The next question is, can he get Tariq Bracy to solidify himself in the slot? And can he get one to two of those younger players to step up and to force themselves onto the field? Talking to a source the other day, Sean, it was The problem with the reason they didn't put in Barnes and Riley and those guys last year was they just weren't able to consistently execute.
Right.
They would show flashes, but when you play this schedule that Notre Dame played, especially when the margin for error was so thin because you lost to Cincinnati early, it's like we can't afford to give up that big play because there wasn't a lot of confidence in the offense that they could go out and outscore people, after the first month of the season, I understand that. You barely beat Florida State. You barely beat Toledo.
Right.
You didn't exactly blow Purdue out of off the field. Wisconsin game was far more competitive than the final score dictated. And, so it's like Virginia Tech was super close. You lost to Cincinnati. It's like we can't afford to put a young kid on there and he's going to make 7 or 8 straight really good plays and then blow a coverage and give up a touchdown.
Yeah.
Right? Like you just can't do it. Well, that consistency got better. Philip Riley got better this spring in the slot. Ryan Barnes from everyone I've talked to, had a great spring.
Yeah.
Great spring. So to me, the key is Ryan Barnes is the key, in my opinion, because Ryan Barnes stepping up and emerging this summer and into the fall accomplishes 3 very important things. Number 1, it gives you incredible length at corner. Number 2, it allows you to use Clarence Lewis as more of a part of a rotation that can play boundary, can play field, can play some nickel. You can if you can play Clarence Lewis for 30 to 35 fewer snaps a game, because he had to be on the field all the time last year.
Right.
Then you can then protect him better. Now he becomes better. And it takes the pressure off the freshmen, Jaden Mickey and Benjamin Morrison. To now, if they play, it's because they're just too good to keep off the field, as opposed to we got to play them because these guys aren't panning out.
Yeah.
So if Benjamin Morrison and Chance Tucker's, another kid along with Philip Riley that's really coming along, I think Ryan Barnes is the key. But if it's not him, if it's Philip Riley breaks out, if it's Chance Tucker breaks out, the bigger picture is one of those sophomores has to step up and prove himself. And if they do, then that it has the same, it accomplishes the same objective. The reason I bring up Ryan Barnes is because, number 1, I just think he's the best of that group. That's a personal thing. And number 2, from everybody I've talked to, Sean, and I think you've heard similar things, Ryan's the one that is ahead of the game when it comes to the younger players.
Yeah.
And Jaden Mickey's going to play, but if he doesn't have to play, then you can be more selective with how you use him, which makes him more effective. Maybe you play him more in the slot instead of outside, where he rotates in with Tariq Bracy. Maybe he plays some more boundary or some field, depending on how you're going to use those guys. So, and then same thing with Benjamin Morrison. There's just less pressure on those guys, Sean, if Ryan Barnes. So I think for Coach Mickens, he's the guy to me defensively that has the biggest task, because with Al Washington, it's like, dude, don't screw this up. Right? Like,
right.
We've had pretty darn good D lines. We're handing you some studs, a couple potential All-Americans. Don't mess this thing up, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Al Golden, we've had this defense rolling for a few years now. Just, keep building on it. And with Coach Mickens, like that was a weak spot of your football team last year. You've got to now make it at least good. That's, to me, the biggest test, in my opinion, of all the first year coaches. He has to make the biggest jump from where it was to what it is. I'm confident he's going to do it, but now he needs to go out there and get it done.
So let me get this right. Harry Heaston is not a returning coach, right?
No, he does not count, right? Doesn't count. You could call it that, but he doesn't count. So he's new. He replaces what was there. I love it. Yeah, it's hilarious.
All jokes aside, though, everything you said about Chris O'Leary and the job he did after Kyle Hamilton went down with the injury, spot on. And what you said about Coach Mickens, once again, spot on. He was very clear how happy he was with how competitive his room is.
Yeah.
And how that makes everyone in the room better.
Yeah.
I think when Cam Hart came back and spoke towards the end of the spring, when he finally came back from his surgery and was starting to rehab and do drills on the field, he talked about how the youngsters are different than me, but I love it because I see they put in the work. And he's talking about those young guys that are a little bit more exuberant. Cam's just really laid back. great kind of leader you want to have in the
Mhm.
room. People listen when he speaks. They respect what he's done on and off the field, and they know that they can follow him.
Right.
Tariq Bracy's a kid that has kind of gone through it, right? He comes in, he's solid, wasn't a speedster, technician,
No, he
and,
is a speedster, though. Tariq's a speedster.
and he loses it for a little bit,
Yeah.
loses his technique, fails a little bit, gets himself back in.
Gets benched. I mean,
Gets
let's
benched,
be real.
absolutely.
He flat got benched in
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah. Yeah. He
You're
comes
being
back.
nice because you got church tomorrow. You're being nice. He flat lost it and got benched in 2020 and bounced back.
Absolutely. And I said that Clarence Lewis he'll decide how he ends up and how his narrative is written this season, the way he plays. But he has someone in Tariq Bracy that he can talk to about how to get through that mentally. Coach Mickens pointed out to us, Coach Mickens started as a freshman at Cincinnati. Under Brian Kelly. So he knows what Benjamin Morrison and Jay Mickey are dealing with and the level they have to be at to be able to get on.
It's why he's had success with freshmen in the past.
Absolutely.
Nick Johnson at Bowling Green, Sauce Gardner at Cincinnati.
Yes.
I want to talk about Clarence Lewis. Clarence Lewis, to me, I actually liked Clarence Lewis coming out of high school, to be honest with you. I thought, but he was a 3.5-star kid that I gave a 4-star upside grade to.
Yeah.
The thing about Clarence that I think he gets a bad rap, understandably, because he just didn't play well last year. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He didn't play well last year against all the good teams they played.
Yeah.
But the problem is Clarence was thrust into a role he wasn't recruited to play, meaning they didn't recruit Clarence Thomas. They didn't recruit Clarence Lewis to be a guy that was going to start in the playoff game as a true freshman.
Right.
He was thrust into that because Tariq Bracy collapsed and poor recruiting in the past. Right. And if they didn't get Nick McLeod that year, they'd have been really screwed in the corner at the cornerback. And the same thing is true last year. He was not recruited to be the guy at corner last year. And then you got hurt by the fact that his first year as a true freshman, people forget, was the weirdest year we've seen of my lifetime. No spring ball. You get a late start on fall camp. You go through a period when the season starts where you miss basically 2 weeks because the program shuts down because of COVID, right? Like, we forget a lot about that because we're kind of back to normal in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
We forget about the fact that was that's what Clarence had to go through his first year at Notre Dame. Then there's a defensive coaching change. And they went from being more of a zone-oriented team to a man-oriented team, which is not his game. He's not a man guy, especially as a sophomore. He was thrust into a role that he wasn't prepared for, and he's now entering this phase of his career that I thought he'd start to emerge. And so how he bounces back mentally is going to be key because I think he's getting bigger. He's stronger. He's a little bit quicker than he was in the fall. I thought athletically he looked better in the spring than he did, which is kind of what we thought would happen. I thought he was a guy that needed time to develop. And so the struggles that he's had, if he mentally bounces back, I think are going to benefit him. But this is when we expected Clarence Lewis to start to emerge, is now.
Yeah.
And had Notre Dame's recruiting at corner not been a mess beforehand, and they not lost all those kids in 2017, they had Thomas Graham was a silent commit. They had Paulson Adebo committed. They had Elijah Hicks committed, who ended up going to Cal. They lost kids that, kids didn't develop, all this other kind of stuff, to where he's thrust into the lineup. If Clarence Lewis was allowed to kind of sit out as a freshman, be a special teams rotation corner last year, our impression of him going into this year would be different based on the spring he had, because he had a good spring.
Right.
The positive is from everything I've been told from my sources, and I know Coach Mickens has talked about this, Coach Freeman's talked about this, it sounds like Clarence has not allowed his struggles last year to mentally affect him at all. If anything, it's kind of ticked him off and made him hungry, which is what you want to see. That tells me we don't know if Clarence has the athleticism to play corner at a high level at a place like Notre Dame.
Yeah.
We're going to find that out this year.
Yeah.
But what he has shown me this offseason, Sean, is he's got the mindset to be a cornerback at this level.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to start.
The one
So
thing
that's my take on it.
The one thing, and I fully believe that Coach Mickens and his entire room will be able to improve upon their performance last year, which wasn't, I can't deem it as bad,
Right.
But
I will.
I think that you can.
Yeah.
I think from a number standpoint, they were asked to do certain things, and I don't think they were equipped to do
I don't disagree with that, but the fact is the results were not good.
Oh, the results are not good. No,
right. That's what I'm saying is bad.
Yeah.
We can talk about all the reasons why. And I just I agree with what you're saying, Sean. But I'm just saying what I'm referring to when I say bad is the result, the end result.
Yeah.
Whatever the circumstances were, the end result was not good.
Bowl game was bad.
Right.
There's
Cincinnati was bad.
Cincinnati was bad. No.
And if Wisconsin had a quarterback that could complete a pass beyond 10 yards, that would have been bad because he got smoked a couple times that game too.
Absolutely. And the one thing you can see in recruiting, and Brian, we talked about this, like looking at the guys that they've offered 23, especially in 24, what you see is a variety. You have the big kids, that like to play off man. You have the smaller kids. Even though they're long, they're a little bit smaller, but they can run and they can play man to man. There's so much variety. And when I watch practices, I saw a variety of coverages. I saw them working on zone coverages and the specifics of zone coverage and how important communication is in zone coverages and working with the safeties and working with one another. Everything they've been working on, I think you're going to see the fruits of their labor come to fruition during the season. I really do. And I think the depth that is there that maybe they didn't have last year because of the inconsistency of the younger guys, they're more consistent. Even on the back end with the safeties, with Xavier Watts. Now, is there someone that surprises us and steps up and becomes a guy?
Right.
Like Cam Hart stepped up and became a guy. Remember, we were questioning, like, okay, he's coming over from offense.
Right. The talent's there. Is he going to be able to make the transition and all that?
And all of a sudden, Cam Hart becomes.
No, I'll say Vince didn't question him. Vince was riding the Cam Hart hype train day one. I mean, day one, Vince was riding that train. He was the conductor of the Cam Hart hype train. There's no question about it.
So,
right.
With that, but I want to go to something that you talked about, Ryan Barnes. And he said something this week. He was on with the Irish Players Club and he spoke about team morale. Look, especially as a young player, when you're trying to get better and feel free to play, and you don't feel like every mistake is being like looked at, and you're not having confidence, I'm not trying to open the doorway for you, Brian.
Oh, yes, you are. Look at your face. Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay, I'll throw the alley-oop. But you can speak to this on the coaching staff. Young players, they have to feel like they're allowed to develop without being put down when they make a mistake. It's like, it's like being a parent. Like if your child makes a mistake, it's like you admonish that mistake. You point it out. Like, hey, I don't want to see that again.
Right.
All right. But once you admonish it and you talk about it, you let them know you're going to be okay. Now let's get back to doing it the way I asked you to do it, or you were, instructed to do it. And I think there's more morale in the locker room. I think there's more morale in the program. And I think that within itself is going to give us a lot of development, especially amongst the younger players that we possibly didn't see in previous years. And I'll just leave it at that. I'll just leave it at that. I'm really excited to see what this young defensive backfield can do.
I'm going to choose to let that one go by. I'll just add this. There's a right way and a wrong way to demand excellence.
Well said.
I think the program now is in a position with the leadership of Marcus Freeman and Al Golden and Mike Mickens and Al Washington and Chris O'Leary, where the standard is going to be just as great, if not higher than it was.
Yeah.
But the manner in which it is taught and enforced and reinforced is going to be completely different.
Yeah.
And that's where there's the change in culture. I think there's this misconception that Marcus Freeman as a player's coach means when a guy makes a mistake, he walks up and he hugs him and says, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay."
Nah.
Trust me, that ain't it. But there's a level of trust that exists now, top to bottom, that I don't think existed before.
No.
And I'll leave it at that. And that creates a much better learning environment. And
what you just said,
you know,
I'll give you a great example from the blue and gold game.
mm-hmm.
Early in the game, this will go to how one play could probably change someone's entire day. There was a key third down early in the blue and gold game. Drew Pine throws an out route to Deion Colsey. And it's tight coverage.
Mm-hmm.
But Drew Pine puts it in between defenders. And Deion Colsey goes up in the air, just doesn't come down.
Right.
Right? This is 2 series later. There's a break. And Deion, it's the change of the quarter. And they're switching sides. And Deion is running down the field. And you see Freeman jogging. He says, "Deion." And Colsey turns to him and says, "Hey, I got to have that from you. We got to have that." And it's amazing how that third down conversion could have possibly led to a positive drive, a successful drive, could have gotten Drew into a nice lather, a good rhythm early in the game, and could have changed like the entire performance of the day. And it's like, yo, he's letting Deion Colsey know, no, that's not good enough.
Right.
No, we expect more from you.
Right.
Like when that pass, the fade route in the end zone, you couldn't get your feet down, like you came down with the catch, but we need you. We need 6. You matter.
Right.
You are an important part of this offense, and you have to be able to make that play. And so that's what you're talking about, being able to build up guys, but at the same time admonishing like, yo, that is not good enough. That's not what we expect.
The standard is going to be high. It's how they go about getting there. It's going to be the change. And that's all I'm going to say on that subject. I did want to address one more thing regarding Clarence Thomas is
Clarence Lewis.
Clarence Lewis. Should have watched that documentary last weekend. I keep saying Clarence Thomas. Clarence Lewis.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we have to understand is I expect, and I can't get too much into this, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble. We're not going to see the same coverage structure this year that we saw last year, which is going to better fit Clarence Lewis's skill set and Ryan Barnes' skill set too. So that's one thing I think we're going to see a little bit differently this year. I don't think we're going to see Clarence Lewis being put on an island all game playing man coverage like he did last year when he was getting in trouble.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say. And I think that's going to help Clarence as well. It's going to help Clarence as well. Offensively, I mean, Sean, we're going to have a whole show on this later, but obviously the task for Tommy Rees is very, very clear. Your job is to make this a championship caliber offense. Marcus Freeman is giving Tommy Rees a lot of freedom to say, okay, you want to build the offense this way? Have at it, Hoss. Here's my expectations. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this, right? Like, so you wouldn't turn the ball over a bunch. But it's general expectations, right?
Right.
Other than that, have at it, Hoss, and get her done, And so he's allowed Tommy Rees to emerge as the face of the offense, which was never the case before. I don't care whether it was Chip Long, whether it was Mike Denbrock, whether it was, Coach Martin, whether it was the first guy whose name I don't even want to say today because I'm in a good mood. The first OC that Notre Dame had, whether it's, Junior, Mike Sanford Jr., doesn't matter who it's been. And then Tommy recently, the face of the offense was always Brian Kelly.
Right.
Now Marcus Freeman is allowing Tommy Rees to emerge into that spotlight and say, you're now the face of the offense. You set the tone, you set the agenda, you do what you feel this needs to be done. But the expectation is that your offense is going to be as good, if not better, than the defense. That's your objective. That's your goal. We got to be able to say we can go win a championship because of our offense. And then, of course, the task to Al Golden is you got to get it to where we can go win a championship because of the defense. But that's Tommy's objective. And I'm digging it, right? I mean, he's got the staff. There's no more blaming the failures, I think Tommy Rees designed and called games really well last year. The execution just wasn't there a lot of the time. And now, some of that falls on him because, his role as OC, you've got to be able, but when you can't block people and you can't get off the line and you can't catch and against tight coverage, there's not a whole lot in your tool belt as a coach that you can go to.
And we stand on that hill, right? Like there was nothing else to do in the Fiesta Bowl.
Right. There's no run play to call. Like you're getting your butt kicked up front. There's no like, well, let's do this. Like you could have maybe called a play to sneak some yards, but that's working once. But those excuses are gone now, right? Like they're gone. You've got Harry Heastand back. You've got Chancey Stuckey. You lost one of the better running back coaches in the business and upgraded this offseason, in my opinion. You lost a really good veteran tight ends coach and upgraded this offseason, right?
Absolutely.
Like this is a significantly better coach. And even if Chancey Stuckey's just okay, you upgraded at wide receiver and you went from, to me, a very mediocre offensive line coach to the best in the business or one of the 2 or 3 best in the business, right? Yeah. You could put Bill Ball in that conversation, put Kyle Flood in that conversation, but Harry Heastand is in that conversation. There's no question about it. And if you don't believe me, try listening to one of the offensive line clinics this summer when they have all the best offensive line coaches get together, do like clinics and stuff. You'll hear Harry Heastand's name mentioned by 10 or 12 different coaches about his influence on them. He's one of the best in the business. There's no more excuses. And I don't think Tommy Rees is looking for any. I think this is what he's wanted. Yeah. Now it's time to say put up or shut up. And I'm looking forward to it because I really think he's going to get this offense rolling. I'm excited about it. But I'm just setting the stage for what the reality is. Whatever we think will or won't happen, the reality is the expectation is that Tommy Rees needs to get this offense going.
Yeah.
No more Brian Kelly holding it back. It's now up to you to go show that you are one of the best minds in the game. I don't care about the 29 years old or 30 or what. That's not an excuse anymore either. You're going into year 3 as an OC. It's time to go show that you are one of the best minds in the game. And I'm looking forward to seeing it. But that's the expectation. That's the standard, right, Sean? And not just do it to where you hung up a 60 spot on UNLV, was only score 17 in Columbus, and then you're like, hey, we're averaging 38 points a game or whatever like that, right? I mean, that's not it, right? Yeah. It's you got to be able to go score in Columbus. You got to score against Clemson. You got to be able to score against BYU. You don't have to score 50 a game against those teams, but you got to be able to go out there and put points on the board to a level that allows you to go out there and win those football games. That's the expectation. So there's a lot there's a lot of expectations and a lot of pressure on the returning coaches. And Mike Mickens has a lot of it. He's the guy that has to me, the greatest pressure on him on defense. Tommy Rees clearly is that guy on offense. He's got to be able to bring all those new faces together, get them working cohesively. That's on him. Like the staff working cohesively, that's not on Marcus Freeman. That's on the OC.
Yeah.
And he's got to be able to do that, right? And if they can get that rolling, man, then I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun.
Everything you just pointed out, the production of the offense, you have weapons. Mm-hmm. You asked for Harry Heastand, you got him.
Uh-huh.
You asked for Chancey Stuckey, you got him.
Mm-hmm.
You got everything.
Turned down some experienced, really good football coaches to get him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now you have everything. You have all the ingredients.
And you just went out and got one of the best running back coaches in the business that's got a Super Bowl ring.
Absolutely. So this meal you prepare this year better be pretty darn good.
That's right.
We give you everything you need.
The only thing they got him that he didn't maybe necessarily want was the tight ends coach.
Right.
A guy who was an offensive coordinator at Power 5 school a year ago.
Right.
Because he's tight with Marcus.
Right.
That's not an excuse because that's a good football coach. That's a real good football coach.
The second thing to look at, and I really just thought about this as you were talking. I'm going to watch how the quarterback situation is handled.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody's going to watch how Tyler Buckner plays.
Mm-hmm.
I want to watch how the quarterback situation between Tyler Buckner and Drew Pine is handled by Tommy Rees. That's what I'm watching.
Sean?
And you know exactly what I'm pointing to without pointing to it.
I am not touching that one today.
Okay.
Here's what I'm going to ask that you'll do while I'm setting up the table for the next topic.
Okay.
I want you to put, if you can, put a link to your guys' show with Malik that you and I were talking about last night? Can you
Yeah.
link that in there so people can listen
Sure.
to that?
Sure.
Because for all the people that have questioned me for what I've been saying about the quarterback development and coaching and why it's been a problem, where it's never been a talent problem, it's always been a head coach problem. Listen to the show that Sean and Malik had yesterday. So if you could put that link in the box below, I would really appreciate that.
Sure.
So I'm going to set up the final stage, Sean, and that is if we believe that the dynasty is coming to a close for Alabama, whether it's this year, next year, soon, then what programs do we think are in a position where they either are now or are trending to be the potential replacements? And so when I think about college football and I think about the dynasties and the programs that are considered the best programs, I've always felt that there's always like 4 to 5, more often than not, like programs that are in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You go back to the 80s, and yes, Miami was that team mid to late 80s, but Miami didn't win it every year, right? Penn State got them one year, but Oklahoma only had one title during that stretch, but Oklahoma every year was like a contender for that. They won it in 85 with Jamel Holloway, and then other years they lost to Miami in a game, and then they had some losses to some, but they were in it, consistently in it. Penn State won 2 titles in the 80s, right? Including a win over Miami. Notre Dame became that team in the late 80s, early 90s. Florida State was that team in the 90s. It was Notre Dame and Miami to start the 90s. Then Florida State kind of emerges mid to late 90s, along with who else? Nebraska and Florida, right? There was always like multiple teams. Nebraska won 3 titles in the 90s. Florida won a title, lost another title game. They were contenders for that. Florida State won 2 titles in the 90s, 93 and 99. There were always multiple teams in that. In the 70s, you had Notre Dame was a dominant program, for most of the 70s. USC was a dominant program in the 70s. Alabama won multiple titles in the 70s, right? There's always been like 3 or 4 like great teams. Nebraska won a couple titles in the early 70s. So, it's the whole Bama and then everybody else thing, and then eventually Clemson kind of comes on for the latter half of this decade, and they kind of become number 2 along with Bama for a shorter period of time, and then now they're kind of already fading back again, where Bama's still kind of in a strong place. The whole Bama and then everybody else is kind of unique. It's kind of new. It hasn't been the trend we've seen, and I don't think it's going to become a permanent trend. I think that we're going to see it kind of go back to the way it used to be, which is there's like 4 or 5 teams throughout a decade that kind of step into that spotlight. Mm-hmm. Not maybe every year, but for the most part, there's going to be 4 or 5 teams that you look at and say, boy, this team has a legitimate chance. Colorado went through that. There was Colorado was like Clemson for a hot minute, where they were like a dominant team for like a 4 to 5 year window, and then they faded.
Right.
So and we'll see if Clemson can prolong it and get back on track or not. We'll find out. But I mean, right now, all we can look at is from 15 to 20. Clemson was a powerhouse. 21, they started to fall off. Do they get back on track, or do they continue to trend down? We'll find out. So let's kind of look at the programs, Sean, that you and I think have an opportunity to be that. And then, of course, we'll talk about Notre Dame at the end. And that'll be where we kind of end the conversation. So let's first begin, Sean, with the league that Alabama is in, and that is the SEC, because here's the reality of it. Until Bama, the SEC is always going to have a dominant program. And until somebody can jump Bama, it's going to be Bama.
Right.
Even if Bama isn't what they've been, somebody's got to jump them. I think the obvious one is Georgia.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the obvious one. They just won a title. But what we're talking about isn't a team that can creep up and win a title every now and then. Auburn did that and then went 3-9 like 2 years later, right? LSU did that, and then their coach got fired 2 years later. We're not talking about that everything went right that 1 year. You got the generational quarterback that 1 year. We're talking about established programs that are considered, dynasty type of programs. Dynasty meaning, you're great for a period of time.
Yeah.
You either win multiple titles or you're playing for multiple titles, and you can't be a dynasty without winning at least one, right? Like
right.
the Bills aren't a dynasty. They had a great run, but they weren't a dynasty because they never won the biggest one. Like the Broncos in the late 80s weren't a dynasty because they got to 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, but they lost them all, right? Like, you know, can you be that team for a period? Like the Broncos in the late 90s weren't a dynasty either because they had 2 great years and then they were done. Dynasty is a period of at least 5 to 6 years where you're a championship team and then a contender most of the other years.
Yeah.
Georgia, I think, has to show me something still to prove to me that they're not just a one-time team that I still say got a bit of a fluky win. Down year in college football, Bama had tons of injuries. They earned that win. They were the better team that day because Bama wasn't the same team. But that was the same team that pounded them into submission a month before.
Yeah.
Right? In the SEC title game.
That wasn't Kirby's best team.
No.
17
to me is still his best team.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%. 100%. So can they sustain that? And here's the point, Sean. This was a really good Georgia team.
Yeah.
This was one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country this year. There's no doubt about it. To your point, they don't beat 2020 Bama. It's not even close. They don't have a chance against 2019. Do you really think Stetson Bennett is going to beat Joe Burrow in 2019? Do you think Stetson Bennett and that team, that offense is going to beat Clemson in 2018? No, they don't.
No way.
Clemson in 2016? No, they don't. I don't even think they beat their version of themselves in 2017, if I'm being honest with you.
That's all. No.
So
not with those running backs, no.
But here's what Georgia has done. They have recruited extremely well for a number of consistent years. That's step number 1 to being a dynasty. You can win a title with that 1 or 2 great back-to-back classes, but if you don't continue it, you're a one and done and you're gone, right? Yeah. They've recruited extremely well. They've recruited pretty balanced classes for the most part. Mm-hmm. They have recruited extremely well in the trenches, which is important. Quarterback recruiting to me is the biggest question mark for them. I think they got lucky this year with Stetson Bennett. I'm just going to be honest with you. It was a down, which we said before the year. It's going to be a down year in college football. Bama had some injuries, and we've made that case. You're not going to consistently win titles with a Stetson Bennett at quarterback.
No.
Who is that guy going to be? Is it Brock Vandergriff? Is it going to be somebody else that they've signed, in recent years? Is it someone they're going to sign moving forward? Yeah. Quarterback is the one position that if they don't get that figured out, I don't think they're going to be a dynasty. I think they're going to be a really good team, but never a team that you really think like, gee, yeah, they're going to go win it. Because they were on the verge of becoming Clemson, like before the titles. Because they would have these really good teams and then like lose to 4-8 South Carolina, right? And lose to some team, you're like, what the heck? And then get kind of pounded in some of the bigger games. I mean, LSU pounded them in 2019. They choke games away to Alabama, right? Blowing 2-3 touchdown leads to Alabama, right? Like they were becoming what Clemson was, a better version of what Clemson was pre-Deshaun Watson, right?
Right.
And then they broke through this year and got it done. Do they go back to that? Or do they keep going? To me, it's going to come down to quarterback. They've got to figure something out at quarterback. That's, to me, the big question mark for Georgia. And because, to be honest with you, I think Kirby Smart's a great recruiter. He has a lot of help. I think Kirby is a guy, to me, that is a good motivator. He hires good coaches, I think, for the most part. He's made good coaching hires. But he's not a great game day coach. He's not.
No. And I would question, I think they just – either increased Munkin's salary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's going to be there a little bit longer. I'm not sure.
I like him. I think he's a good coach.
I think he's a good coach.
Yeah. Just needs a quarterback.
He needs a quarterback. And this is the thing. As far as guys, Fromm and Justin Fields were both his guys, right?
Yep.
Was Jacob Eason his guy?
No.
The guy that Fromm replaced because of injury. Right.
I think Jacob Eason, I could be wrong on this, but I think Jacob Eason was Kirby's first class, but he committed to Georgia way before Kirby took over.
Okay.
Yeah. So Kirby I'm having trouble speaking the English language today. Kirby Smart started in 2016, correct?
Yeah.
That was his first year.
Yeah.
Jacob Eason was part of the 2016 class.
Okay.
But I'm looking it up now. I believe he committed really early. He committed in 2014. So he was a lot like Phil Dracovic.
Right.
Phil Dracovic was not Chip Long's guy, even though he only ever played for Chip Long because he committed before Chip was hired.
Right.
Similar situation.
Right.
Similar situation.
To me, Kirby recruits like Nick Saban used to.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning he would much rather be stout up front on both sides of the ball, be able to run the ball, be able to stop the run, really great defense, and just have a quarterback that just won't make mistakes and just beat you that way. But he has really good players. Really good players. Wide receiver is another position that he probably could recruit a little bit better because they're able to get that one guy that can dominate. But like as far as depth in the wide receiver room, I can't say that I've seen that at Georgia from a depth standpoint. I think they lost, like Burton had a touchdown in the championship game and he transferred out.
Right.
Probably looking at his ability to get to the next level.
Right.
Playing with their quarterback. You know what? Let me go to Alabama.
Right.
Play with a guy I know.
If he thought Stetson Bennett was a dude, he's not leaving Georgia. He was a freaking starter. He's not leaving Georgia to go to Alabama.
Right.
Exactly right.
So now they had a kid like Justin Fields. So they can recruit elite quarterbacks, but now it goes to beg the question: can they develop?
Right. Brock Vandegrift in the 2020 class was a top 50 kid.
Yeah.
Right. Gunnar Stockton was some people had as a top 100 kid last year. And but the offense and the way it's been, Sean, is going to make it harder to recruit elite quarterbacks moving forward.
That's why he needs to make the change like his mentor and say, hey, let's change some things up. Maybe bring in, because you like Monken, but Monken can build around what Kirby wants.
Monken is being, in my opinion, held back by
what?
Saban.
That could be.
Because remember, Todd Monken was the offensive coordinator in 2011 for that Oklahoma State team that scored 50 points a game.
Right.
I mean, and I've said this. I mean, to me, that team should have played for the championship in 2011. They should have played LSU for the title. Alabama had no business being in that title game. And I think Oklahoma State would have won the title that year. I mean, that was that Brandon Weeden, Justin Blackman team that was explosive. I mean, that's why NFL teams. That's why he went for the NFL.
And we saw that. A perfect example. He was being held back in a championship game, and all of a sudden they go down in the fourth quarter, and they have no choice but to open it up.
Right. Anyway,
and all of a sudden they're throwing deep balls.
Dude, look what happened after they fell behind Alabama.
Right.
They open it up, and all of a sudden the offense starts moving.
Exactly. So you're probably spot on. Kirby's probably holding them back, and he has to get to that point, the same as Nick Saban did, where Nick said, "You know what? I can bring these offensive minds that are going to say no to me.
Right.
I can bring a Lane Kiffin on. I can bring a Steve Sarkisian on. I can bring guys that want to open up and take more risk than I'm usually used to allowing my offensive coordinators to do." And so
it's going to take him getting whooped a couple times though to do that. That's because to me, it's almost like for long. Hear this the right way. I'm not saying that winning the title last year was a bad thing. It was a phenomenal thing. You haven't won a championship since Herschel Walker was playing, and that was like 40 years ago. I was 2 years old the last time they won a national championship, right? It was a great thing. But in regards to accomplishing what you just said, Sean, and you accurately stated, is as far as opening, it's going to require them to be I don't think they've got to be a 45. They don't have to be LSU 2019, but they got to be a little bit more explosive than they've been.
Yeah.
They can still be a pro-style team. But to get there, it's almost like winning it not that way sort of doubles down on the thought that, well, we can keep doing it this way.
Right.
And so like long term, it may, it may take them to get smacked around a couple times to realize like, okay, yeah, we can't, we may have done it once because everything went our way.
Yeah.
But, people say, like, if that Alabama wins that game, if those guys don't get hurt, you think Kirby Smart. No, you don't. Because a lot of times when you're on the inside of something, you don't have the same perspective as someone who's an out. I mean, just you have way more perspective on a lot of things, but in regards to how you stack up big picture when you're having the success you're having and then you win a title, well, you're clearly wrong. Well, okay. I can't prove it to you that you would have lost if those guys didn't get hurt. I can't prove it to you. The best thing I can do is say, look what happened in the conference title game. Got your freaking butts kicked.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you couldn't cover Jamison Williams the first quarter half of that game.
No.
I mean,
not at all.
So let's not act like, you were out there, whooping them from jump. So it's going to require, in my opinion, for Georgia to remain to replace Bama. Right? That's the goal, right? Is to replace Bama. To me, it's going to require him to open things up a little bit and to be able to land and develop a top quarterback. That's going to be the key. And so outside of that, Jamison Williams had 4 catches for 65 yards in basically a quarter and a half of football.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, come on now. And he had 7 catches for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns in the conference championship game against Georgia.
Yeah.
He was on pace for a similar performance.
Yep.
So Georgia's there. I am very curious to see what happens with Billy Napier at Florida. And Ryan brought up a team yesterday that could potentially have a say in this whole thing. And the point is, it's not that these teams are necessarily going to be the next dynasties, but could they be good enough to keep Georgia from being that next dynasty? And that is Florida with Billy Napier and Tennessee with Josh Heupel and what they're doing. And so that to me is going to be a very, very interesting aspect of this whole thing, Sean.
Tennessee is my sleeper on my list.
Yeah.
Tennessee is my sleeper on my list because they're doing you can't overlook the job they're doing in recruiting. Yeah. They have their quarterback.
And he did a phenomenal job developing Hendon Hooker last year.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. So I'm looking forward to seeing Hooker and how he further develops, how he looks. They have the quarterback of the future. They got a chance to land a couple of 5-star wide receivers, some really good wide receivers in the 23 class. And then in the state of Tennessee, in 2024 and 25, there's some really good talent. I mean, there's some kids, you just go look at Caleb Beasley, and, his friend at linebacker, they both are in the 24 class.
Edwin Spillman, right?
Edwin Spillman.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame's in on both of those kids. Both of those kids can end up at Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Like the state has a lot of talent.
And as we talked about yesterday, Sean, is they're a state away from Ohio. Yeah. They're a state away from Indiana. Mm-hmm. They border on the state of Virginia.
Yep.
I mean, they're kind of right in that unique centralized area where they can go north and south and get players and still be considered a local school.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people that can do that. Really, I mean, they're the only one that can really do that.
Yeah.
So, yes, I agree. Tennessee and Florida emerging are very interesting. Now, there's 2 ways to look at it. Number one is their emergence is something that hurts Georgia. The other way of looking at it is their emergence forces Georgia to open things up, and then that makes Georgia
the dominant team. Yes.
Correct. Either Kirby's going to be stubborn and they're going to be really good, but they're just it'll look a lot like the SEC East did back when Philip Fulmer and Steve Spurrier were battling it out.
Yeah.
And Georgia had some good teams back then, but it was like they kind of beat each other up a little bit. You know, Tennessee would knock off Florida some years. Florida would knock off Tennessee some other years. I mean, big reason why Peyton Manning never won a national championship is because of Florida, Steve Spurrier in Florida, right? And then there was other years where Florida had a chance to compete for a title, but they couldn't because they got beat by Tennessee. Yeah. And, the T. Martin year obviously was one example of that. So, I think that the East, I will not be surprised if in 3 to 4 years, the best division in the SEC is the East. Because I'm going to say this. I think the SEC West is vastly overrated. I think LSU stinks. I think Ole Miss is limited. I think Mississippi State is limited. I think Arkansas is limited. I don't think Auburn has a great coach. I think they have a very mediocre coach. And I think that A&M is a team that will never be a legitimate title contender with Jimbo Fisher as their head coach. He's just not that guy. in my opinion, because he can't do at A&M what he did at Florida State, which is just out-talent 12 opponents until you get to the title game.
Right.
Fall behind Auburn 17-0, but you're still so much more talented than them that you can just kind of overcome it. And you're fresh because you've basically, steamrolled a crap conference your whole year, which is exactly what happened in 2013 when he won it at Florida State. He is more the guy that they sleptwalk through 2014 and they got their brains beat in by Oregon. That's Jimbo to me. And when they got to the college football playoff, that's Jimbo to me.
That was in a Rose Bowl, right?
Right. Correct. And he's just not that guy.
Yeah.
So I look, and that's to me what's prolonging Bama's dominance has been the fact that the SEC West is vastly overrated. We hear, it's the best conference. No. It's not. It's an overrated conference. It's like last year. A&M preseason top 10 team. Yeah, 8-4. Okay, Coco, good job there, guys. 8-4 football team, and it just is not a team that I look at and say that's not a great.
I would venture to say the trio, and you might not. Look, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. That three, and you look at the production, and I know you really don't love what's been done at Penn State.
Well, the last couple of years, 3 years ago, the conference I would have had because 3 years ago, because Michigan was coming along like 15 and 16 to 18.
Yeah. And
then you had Penn State was in the Cotton Bowl a few years ago. My issue with Penn State is the last 2 years, they have fallen off of a cliff. They've gone 11-11, right? But he had 3 out of 4 years. They were a 10-plus win team.
Yeah.
So could the Big Ten East get there? Yes.
Well, now
Harbaugh's got to
Michigan State again,
right? If Mel Tucker can keep doing what he's doing, if Penn State can kind of show that the last 2 years was just a weird, like it was like if Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt against Iowa this year, I think they beat Iowa, and then maybe who knows what that does to the rest of the year, right? I mean, and then the COVID year before that. I'm not a big James Franklin fan, but the thing I loved about what he did in 2020 was he did a terrible job getting his team ready to start that year, but they could have easily folded like Michigan did, but they didn't. They won like their last 4 games.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I give him credit for that. Right. Yeah. But he's got to recruit better at certain positions, quarterback being one. Well, they just went out and got a quarterback that I'm a big fan of, and Drew Aller. Now you got to develop him. Right. You've got to show me that you can get more out of the talent, because the one thing about Penn State, Sean, is they have talent. The biggest issue for me with James Franklin is, number one, he's an even worse game day coach than Kirby Smart. It's a fact.
Yeah.
The other problem is he has not, like Kirby, the part of Kirby that I don't like is game day. The part of Kirby I like is he's really good at hiring good coaching staffs. You got to give Kirby credit. He knows how to put together a good coaching staff.
Yeah.
James Franklin has not been able to do that. He had like that one great hire with Joe Moorhead, but some of his other decisions with offensive coordinators have been very shaky.
Very questionable.
Very shaky. And that's a big question mark for me. Now, I think he made some good hires this offseason. We'll see. He got the guy from Texas. We'll see what he can do there. We'll see what they can do on defense. But Penn State's the key to what you're saying. Penn State's the key to making that happen. Then, of course, Michigan's got to show that 19 and 20 were flukes, that he's back to being the guy he was from like 15 to 18.
Yeah.
Right. And then Mel Tucker's got to say, hey, look, we may not be a 10-win team again this year, but we're surging. We're getting back.
We're going to make it hard. That's one thing I've said historically. If you go back and watch their games against Ohio State since James Franklin has been there, he's given Ohio State the most trouble since
consistently.
Consistently.
Even his bad teams.
Tough game. Yeah.
They gave him a good game in 2020.
Yeah.
That was competitive for a while.
Yeah.
Because he's a great motivator. His team, I have never seen, rarely seen. There was one game in 2020, I think it was against Maryland, where they didn't want to be there. I mean, that team was just so unprepared to be there. But again, that wasn't an anomaly season because of COVID and everything else. And they went out and got blasted by Maryland, lost to Nebraska, got blown out by Iowa.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they quit.
Yeah.
But then they went out the next week and beat Michigan at Michigan, Then they went out and beat Rutgers. Then they beat Michigan State convincingly. Then they beat Illinois convincingly. Like, you know what? He was able to rally the troops, whereas Michigan, when things went south for Michigan, Michigan just folded.
Yeah.
And then, basically, I still believe they ducked out of the Ohio State game. I think they ducked out of the Ohio State game, in my opinion. But, it's going to be interesting to see what they do, Sean, because he can get that. His teams, the point I was making is his teams don't often show up unprepared to play. They've had some ugly bowl games, but I don't care about bowl games. I just look at it and say, like, even Michigan State last year, they lost by 3 points to Michigan State. They lost by 9 points at Ohio State. They've got these really ugly losses, 4 points to Michigan in the close game.
Right.
And then they got this ugly loss to Illinois in overtime
last year, just for no reason.
I mean, if you beat Illinois, which if you lost at home to Illinois, and if Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt against Iowa, all of a sudden Penn State's 7-0.
Yeah.
And now they finished the year 9-4 or whatever, and now we're having a different conversation about Penn State than we did. So I think the Big Ten East has a chance to become the dominant conference, and the other conference that has a chance to become that is the SEC East.
Yeah,
because Georgia was able to beat Bama last year. Florida, I think, will be better, and they weren't. It's not like they were terrible for a long time. They were in the SEC title game two of the last 3 years, right?
Yep.
And then you look at Tennessee's emerging, and one of the most underrated and not discussed enough coaches in all of college football is Mark Stoops. That dude has two 10-win seasons at Kentucky in the last 5 years.
Yes.
He is doing a good job. And again, another guy that has shown that he can hire good coaches.
Mm-hmm.
He makes good hires. And so Missouri, we'll see what they can do, but that's a program that should be better. If they hire the right coach, they can quickly ascend.
Yeah.
But you've got the three that we talked about, the big boys, and then Kentucky.
Yeah.
That has a chance to become a really, really, really strong division if Heupel can build on the success he's had, and if Billy Napier can be that guy at Florida. Those are undetermined. We're not saying they're there now.
Yeah.
But if those guys are what we think they are, and Kentucky can keep Mark Stoops there for a while, the East has a chance to supplant the West, in my opinion. Because I look at the West and I'm like, other than Alabama, none of those. I don't have respect for any of those programs. To be honest with you. They're overrated every year.
You're talking about coaching bloodlines with Heupel and Mark Stoops, which goes back to Bob Stoops and Heupel being a part, literally on the field, being a part of the resurgence of Oklahoma football, and knowing how to establish that and recruit and win. He did it at Central Florida. You can tell he can develop quarterbacks. That right there, and how it bodes well for future recruiting at that position for him, gives him an upper hand on Kirby Smart and Stoops, who are defensive guys. Like when you're the head guy and you can show, hey, look, you come here, I'm going to develop you. Look, you'll get better. I've done it everywhere. Right? Look at the kids I developed in Central Florida. Look at the kid I just developed Hooker on last year and how much better he is. Now look at Nico. How he's going to be.
Right.
I think if I were to choose between those three teams, I might lean Josh Heupel in Tennessee right now.
Three teams is in Florida, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Yeah. Well, they have more built-in advantages than Kentucky.
Oh,
and Kentucky is good because of the job Mark Stoops is doing. But Kentucky's come. I don't disagree with you. You just said I'm adding on to the whole SEC.
You think Stoops stays at Kentucky?
I mean, I think there's some things in his background that are making it difficult for teams to justify hiring him.
Yeah.
I've heard there's some stuff from Florida State and some other times that it's like why teams aren't looking at him because he's not hardly getting even sniffed. So I think that may be by default. I don't know how true that is, but I mean, he's turned down. I mean, we haven't heard his name mentioned anywhere. I mean, even when the Florida State, Florida State hired Willie Taggart and Mike Norvell over Mark Stoops.
Yeah.
So clearly there's something there. And that's Tennessee's benefit. But Tennessee's coming off a recruiting class that, according to Rivals last year, was ranked the 13th best class in the country.
Yeah.
I mean, like he's bringing in talent. That's the thing. He's producing first-round draft picks. So you had the Josh Allen kid a couple of years ago. You had the linebacker last year for the Washington team. Like he is bringing in, he's putting guys in the NFL. Like the Robinson kid that transferred from Nebraska was like what, a second or third round pick this year.
Yeah.
People are projecting Will Levis as a first round pick, which I think is absurd. But I think it speaks volumes to the job that they did last year, that people actually think that football team, or that quarterback is a first round pick. That says a lot about the job that he's doing, because he was a kid that Penn State didn't even allow him to throw the football.
Yeah.
They didn't even allow him to throw. He just going there to run.
Yeah.
And so, like, Missouri had the number 15 recruiting class in the country last year, according to 24/7 Sports. So I think the East is ascending, and I think the West is where the hype is.
Yeah.
But I don't think the ascending programs are not in the West, in my opinion. They're in the East.
Could be waiting to replace Ferentz.
Maybe.
At the place he played.
Yeah, maybe. And although Ferentz wants his kid to be that guy. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
So Big Ten, Sean, I think Ohio State is there. I think they are a team that has a chance to be that dynasty team. I don't think they are one right now. It's been 7 years since they won a title.
Mm-hmm.
But they're close. I think they're close because, they played in the title game 2 years ago, got blown out. They've been in the playoffs, college football playoff in what? They made it 14. They made it in 16. They made it in 19, and they made it in 20. Right. So they've made 4 playoff appearances in the last several years. So I think that is something obviously to consider. I think you can make a case that they're a dynasty right now because of, or they should be considered that program now because of what they've done. I guess my question is more about moving forward.
Yeah.
Do you think Ryan Day continues the trend of what they've done, or do you think he's still sort of feasting off of the program that Urban Meyer built? I think that's the big question with Ryan Day that we're gonna find out the next couple of years. We're gonna find that out.
I'm interested in, because I saw someone in the chat say that they're not buying the Mel Tucker hype, and I'm interested in seeing the same way we've seen teams chip away at the depth of Alabama recruiting wise. Mm-hmm. Ohio State just has so much of a talent.
It's huge.
Every week in the Big Ten. I'm just interested in seeing which teams can kind of chip away at that.
Yeah.
If they can. And try to establish, like, okay, we're going to be here. I think Mark D'Antoni, from coaching staff and game planning and everything, definitely went into his matchups with Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Toughness, and like they had advantages that kind of countered the talent gap. So can you decrease the talent gap?
You talking about Penn State? You talking about Penn State?
No, I'm talking about like what Michigan State was able to do against
Michigan State, yeah. And I would say Penn State's a different example. Because I think Penn State actually is the closest to Ohio State in talent. Yeah. They're just not coached as well.
And it's not like Penn State in these games haven't had offensive players and offensive.
Penn State's the one team in the Big Ten that can say we're the closest to Ohio State talent. You go look at the NFL draft, and they've produced high draft picks, combine. Absolutely. They've had stars, Saquon, Micah Parsons. They've had dudes. They've had better talent than anybody else in the Big Ten not named Ohio State.
Yeah.
Michigan State never had the top end talent during the D'Antonio run that Penn State has had the last few years.
That's why I thought the Iowa secondary was so overrated, because if you go watch that Iowa Penn State game, Penn State's wide receivers were running wide open all day. Yeah. They just didn't have anybody to get the ball to them. So, you said, Penn State, Michigan, I don't know, man. They've kind of leveled off from a recruiting standpoint.
Yeah. And the way Harbaugh handled this offseason killed any momentum they had.
Yes.
From the standpoint of
learning
the success
with the Raiders and
Yeah, and the fact that he was telling kids, I want to go to the NFL and all that. He ruined any momentum they had rolling.
Yeah.
They are getting crushed on the recruiting trail, and they were a playoff team last year. That's inexcusable. Inexcusable. Yeah. I will say this. I'm actually sympathetic to what D. Troll Hunter's saying about Tucker. I still think Mel Tucker has a lot to prove to me.
Yeah.
The guy's been a coach for 4 years, and he's had one winning record, one season, one winning season. Now, I think part of that is because he was never anywhere long enough to where he could build that. He's been a head coach for 3 years, and he's gone 5-7, 2-5, and 11-2. He's got to show that he can build that. But the thing that I found unique about Michigan State last year, Sean, is D'Antonio's staff did a great job of doing two things.
Yeah.
Number one, they cleaned up in the state of Michigan during a time when Michigan was down.
Yes.
And they dominated Michigan in state. The other thing is, and this is why I think Mark D'Antonio is a better football coach than Jim Harbaugh, he just doesn't have the resources that Michigan has.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about Michigan State is they were willing to go into the state of Ohio and battle Ohio State.
Yeah.
They lost the majority of their battles and they won a couple. But what they would then do is they would battle for those kids. But then while they're doing that, sneakily kind of go find this kid in Ohio that nobody's ever heard of and then get him. And then all of a sudden the kid turns out to be a good football player.
Yeah.
What Mel Tucker has done is taken advantage of the fact that he's been a bit of a world traveler as a coach. Most of the guys who've been assistants for a long time have been everywhere for the most part. Mel's coached out west. He was at Colorado before getting the Michigan State game, his job and things like that. He's kind of been all over the place as a coach. He's coached at the Bears. He's coached Alabama, the Jaguars, the Browns, LSU, Ohio State. He's kind of coached all over. You look at Michigan State's recruiting class last year, which finished 23rd according to Rivals, which is decent for Michigan State. But they went all over the place to get kids. They signed a 4-star running back from Nevada. They signed a 4-star quarterback that I like a lot, Caton Hauser from St. John Bosco in California, who I like. Obviously they got plenty of Michigan kids. They got a kid, Jerron Glover, who I like from Florida. They got Jack Nickel, a tight end from Georgia. They got another tight end from Arizona. They got an offensive lineman from Georgia and Alabama. They got an offensive lineman from Colorado. They went up to Minnesota. They got a DN from Georgia. They got another DB from Florida. They got two. I mean, they got like 6 kids from Georgia last year. Now, again, these are not kids that they beat Georgia for.
Right.
But there in a state like that, there's going to be these 3-star kids that those big schools don't want that you turn into a good player. Right. So I think those are the keys to me that when you look at this program, if they can do that, then they have a shot to be a contender, which then but again, I don't view them as a team that's going to be a dynasty. I want to get back on track to the dynasty aspect of it a little bit. So Big Ten, I think Ohio State right now is the only team that has a chance to be that. The question is as the Big Ten gets better, can they maintain that or do they fall back to earth a little bit? I think that's a very intriguing question for me when I look at the Big Ten. I think Michigan and Penn State are the other 2 teams in that division or in that league that have a chance to eventually become dynasty type programs. But unlike Ohio State, they need more of they've got to hire the right coach kind of situation. They don't have the same inherent, because here's the reality of it. This used to not be the case. When Joe Paterno was really rolling, Penn State could match Ohio and anyone else for talent.
Yeah.
That's not the case anymore. Ohio is still producing a ton of big-time players, and Pennsylvania's not. And Michigan recruits a ton of doesn't recruit a ton. They recruit really good players, but not the depth that Ohio does. Ohio is still a significantly better foot. It's by far the best northern football state.
Yeah.
It's significantly better than Pennsylvania. It's much deeper than like you could take the top 5 kids from Michigan most years and stack them up against the top 5 kids from Ohio most years. Not all, most, but then there's a huge drop off after that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's built-in advantages that Ohio State has that those other programs don't. You can have a John Cooper who can have a lot of success at Ohio State, but a similar John Cooper at Michigan does not have the same level of success because it's harder there than it is Ohio State. Ohio State is a program where you got to really be a bad coach to not win there, right? The question is, though, can you be a championship coach? And I still think Ryan Day has a lot to prove in that regard. Now, I think the moves he made this offseason show me that he's not Lincoln Riley. Right? Because the change he made on defense. I think he understands we got to run the ball and we got to play better defense.
Yep.
But wanting to do that and then getting that from your team are 2 completely different things. He's got to show me that. Yeah. He's got to show me that. Penn State, I'd say right now, is probably the next best shot the Big Ten has. Because all my issues with James Franklin, number 1, Penn State is a better coaching hire away from that. Or 2, James Franklin figuring it out. Because the biggest, if James Franklin simply just makes better hires, I think Penn State's in a better position.
Agreed.
In my opinion, because they are so much closer to the bigger states, the states that produce big time athletes Maryland, DC, Virginia, Jersey than Michigan is. And I think that James Franklin's a better recruiter than Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah.
So that is going to be that's my area. And to me, Jim Harbaugh and how he handled this offseason has pretty much I just don't see them getting to that next level with him as the coach. But Michigan is a lot like Notre Dame in that they are the right hire away from quickly getting back on track. That's the one thing I'll say about Michigan. Take my anti-Michigan bias aside, Sean. If Harbaugh is to leave, let's say Michigan goes 10-3 this year and some NFL team hires Jim Harbaugh, or he decides to retire.
Yeah.
They are, if you hire the right guy away, their version of Marcus Freeman, whatever the case, from being having a chance to get there. Because I do think Michigan has the resources. They have the prestige. And somebody said this in the chat yesterday. I would argue from a pure brand standpoint, not program. There's a difference between your program. Bama has a better program than Notre Dame. They do not have a bigger brand than Notre Dame. No matter what Bama people want to say, Notre Dame is still the biggest brand in college sports.
Yeah.
Right? And we can agree on that, I think. I would argue that Michigan has the biggest brand in the Big Ten. They don't have the best program, but I still believe they're the biggest brand. Michigan can still go everywhere in the country, and you're like, okay, that's Michigan. And not to the degree that Notre Dame does, but they're the next closest thing in the Midwest to Notre Dame in that regard. That's why I sit there and say that Michigan, if they hire the right guy to replace Harbaugh, can get back on track. I just don't see that happening anytime soon because I don't think Harbaugh is going to go anywhere. I don't think any NFL teams are going to hire him, and I don't think Michigan has the stones to fire him, not after going to the playoff this past year.
That's because Michigan, as well as Notre Dame, has a pretty darn good on-the-field and off-the-field package.
Right.
To offer young men. They flat out do. So that works with the young men, that works with the families.
Right.
And parents look at
you need the right guy to sell it.
You need the right guy to sell it. Absolutely.
And I also think that the thing that's hurt Michigan too is their leadership from an institution standpoint has been pretty piss poor for several years.
Yes.
And they kind of lucked into the Juwan Howard thing, in my opinion, with just the timing of it, in my opinion. But you look over the years, Michigan's made a lot of bad hires over the last 20 years. Going back to basketball, replacing Steve Fisher with Brian. What was the guy's name that replaced Steve Fisher? It was Brian something. I can't remember the heck of his name. And then they hired Tommy Amaker, because they were trying to become the Harvard of the Big Ten. Yeah. And Brian Ellerby. That's who replaced Steve Fisher. And then, he got him in trouble, and then they brought in Tommy Amaker, and he made him a respectable program, but they weren't as serious. I mean, they were like a Harvard.
Fit. Yeah, he's a bad fit.
Tommy Amaker is at the best school that Tommy Amaker can be at ever. I mean, the perfect place for him and what he wants to accomplish as a basketball is Harvard.
It's Harvard.
And that's why he's had the success he's had there. And then you go out and you make a great hire in John Beilein, right? And that worked out well. And then, you kind of luck into when he leaves, you kind of luck into the Juwan Howard situation, right? Yeah. Because you have a former player who's in the NBA and all that other kind of stuff. And then football, Lloyd Carr leaves and they replace him with Rich Rodriguez, which is one of the worst fits I have ever seen in coaching. And then you replace him with Brady Hoke. So there have been a lot of bad hires at Michigan, and they're two prominent sports. And so to me, I don't feel like your president just gets let go because of some shadiness, and he was a guy that tried to. I mean, he was the primary culprit in trying to sabotage the 2020 season for the Big Ten. Right. Their president was the main driver of cancel football.
Yes,
and then he hates Harbaugh because Harbaugh and his team stood up to that, which props to them. The leadership that those kids showed that year. So, to me, and I'm not a Ward Manuel fan, to be honest with you. I don't think he's a strong AD. I just don't.
Yeah.
So I don't think they have the infrastructure in place from a leadership standpoint. But if that changes, Michigan has a chance to quickly jump up, whether we like it or not. I mean, that's just the reality of it, right?
I agree with that. And I think the run they went on post-bowl with Carr, Mallory, and Carr, it's like, okay, his disciples.
Yeah.
The
Right.
structure was there. The
Because
support.
Moeller did a good job.
Moeller.
Moeller did a nice job. If not for the drinking, he would have been there longer.
He'd have been there.
Like you said, Lloyd had them good, won half a title, right? Half a title. Let's be honest, half a title. Because Nebraska won the other half.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. And I don't see any teams in the West are capable of being a dynasty team. I don't.
Yeah.
Now they're really good programs. I mean, Nebraska could be really good. Minnesota could be a quality team. Iowa, Wisconsin, but no dynasty.
If Wisconsin ever got a star quarterback, Wisconsin would dominate the West.
Well, in its current form, yes.
Jim Leonard can coach the hell out of defense. And
I think Nebraska as a program, forget the specifics of who's there now, can be a very good football team.
Yeah.
They're not there now, but in theory, they could be that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but right now, yes, if they go out and land a top quarterback, Wisconsin could be really good. And I still – we talk about this. I still think Malik Zaire should have gone in 2016. Should have gone to Wisconsin, not Florida.
Yeah,
but that's another conversation for another day. So Big Ten, we talked about. Big 12, no. And the reason that I purposely left Texas and Oklahoma out of this conversation because they're going to be in the SEC soon.
Yeah,
and I don't think either one of those teams are capable of becoming dynasties in the SEC. Texas would be the only one that maybe can, in my opinion. But with Oklahoma's will not be a dynasty program. They can't be in the SEC what they were under Bud Wilkinson and Barry Switzer and Bob Stoops in the Big 8, the Big 12, and such. I don't think they can. I don't. I don't know if you want to speak on that, Sean. Texas is the only one that has a chance, in my opinion.
And heck, the conference is about to go through so much of a transition.
Yeah.
In a couple of years, with Texas going to the SEC along with Oklahoma, we can just go out west.
Yeah.
Like, we can just bypass Big 12 and go to the Pac-12.
There's two teams in the Pac-12 that I think have a chance to become those programs, and only one I feel great about. I think Oregon has a chance to be a really good team that it can occasionally, with the right quarterback, make a title run. Like we saw in the 10-14 where they made the title game in 2010, which I thought was a down year in college football. They took advantage of that.
Yeah.
And the Pac-12 stunk a little bit. And then 14, they were a really good football team. They went up. I mean, Ohio State was red hot at that. I mean, Ohio State was on fire. I mean, they beat Wisconsin. They beat a top 15 Wisconsin team 59-0. They physically spanked Alabama in the second half of that game, like just physically beat Alabama up, you know. And and just Oregon didn't have a chance. But that was a really good Oregon football team.
Yeah.
I think Oregon's got a chance to be a really good team. I don't know if Oregon's a team that I believe can be a consistently great team, especially if the Pac-12 is good. That's what we don't talk about enough. The Pac-12, when Oregon had their run of 5 years, had two good teams in it. That's it. Oregon and Stanford. That's it. USC wasn't good. They had a year here, a year there. They weren't a dominant program. Oregon wasn't doing all that stuff when Pete Carroll was there.
No.
They were a good team, right? Oregon had some good teams under Mike Bellotti during that stretch. Right. I mean, the Joey Harrington years, I still think, what was it? What was the year? Was it like 07? They had a quarterback, Sean, and I'm for the life of me cannot remember his name. And I thought that team, there was what was his name? I'm going to look up this kid's name because this is going to bother me. They had a quarterback that was Dennis Dixon. They had a team with Dennis Dixon. That was the 07 team,
right?
The 07 team. No, that was Darren Thomas. Darren Thomas, 2010. The 07 Oregon team, I felt if Dennis Dixon doesn't get hurt, I think they'd have had a shot to play for the title and win it, because I think they'd have got in over LSU. Because they were rolling along that year until Dennis Dixon got hurt. And that hurt them. Like they lost to Cal early, and then they were at one point in time they were like 8-1 and climbed up to let me see where they were. They were ranked really high, and they were rolling, man, in 07. And if you remember, that's the year that LSU won a title with 2 losses. They had climbed up to number 2, Sean. They climbed up all the way to number 2.
When did he get hurt? Was it towards the end of the season?
It was late in the year.
Yeah,
They played Arizona State. They won back-to-back top 10 games. They beat number 9 USC, and then they beat number 6 Arizona State in 07.
Mm-hmm.
They went out and played at Arizona, who was not good that year, and when Dennis Dixon got hurt, they just fell apart. They lost to Arizona on the road. They lost to UCLA on the road, and then they lost to a Mike Stoops 5-7 Arizona team. They lost to a 6-7 UCLA Carl Durrell team, and that was actually a decent Oregon State team. They lost 9-4, but they lost at home.
Yeah,
and I mean that team was good. Remember, that was the team that beat Michigan 39-7.
Yeah,
remember, because sadly they contributed to Notre Dame getting destroyed by Michigan the next week. Because Michigan had just lost to App State, and they were reeling, and Oregon destroyed them that next week, 39-7. Beat a decent Art Briles Houston team early in the year, 47-27. And you know, like I said, that team was good. But again, when you lose a quarterback and go from title contender to losing to Arizona, UCLA, and Oregon State, it says a lot about your program. That you don't have that same depth of talent.
Yeah.
And the point is I think that's who Oregon is, more so than a truly dominant team that can go through every year and say, we'll play anybody, anywhere, and we think we can beat you. I just don't know if they can ever get to that. It's too far away. The West Coast doesn't produce the same type of talent it used to, and a lot of those kids don't want to stay on the West Coast anymore for a million different reasons. And I just think it's harder for teams out West to consistently build it. And I'll say the same thing, USC. USC is the other dynasty contender out West. But if they make changes to the transfer portal, it's going to make it a lot harder for USC to stay a contender. Can you name a single California offensive lineman that is recruitable for Notre Dame? There isn't one. Not in 2023.
Not 2023.
And that's the whole point. They're still producing quarterbacks and skill players, but they're just not. You used to basically almost be able to build your roster with California kids, and that's not true anymore.
No.
It's not true anymore. And so I just think it's harder for a West Coast team to win for a lot more reasons than kickoff times on ESPN.
Yeah.
There's a lot more fundamental problems that until those change, it's going to be harder. But I'll say this. That's why I think USC is the only team in the West Coast that has a chance to become a dynasty, because USC is the one team, in my opinion, that can consistently recruit anywhere if they have the right coach. Oregon can to a degree. Oregon can steal a kid from Florida. You know, they've been able to do that. But USC can consistently recruit Ohio kids, Jersey kids, Florida kids, if they're rolling, if they're good. And that's the key.
You know what, though? Oregon is like every recruit tells every other recruit, yo, you have to at least take an official visit to Oregon. Oregon's going to be a great visit. Like, it's rarely someone goes to Oregon and does not have a really good time.
Right. But most of them don't still pick Oregon.
Right. They won't.
Right.
But it's like, go take the visit. Like, you're definitely going to enjoy yourself. So,
right.
And for me, the foundation under Bellotti was go grab California kids, right? The kids that UCLA used to get, because UCLA was down. Let's go get the kids UCLA used to get. All right, that can't get in onto USC squad. Let's get those kids, and then let's go get the JC kids, and let's fill 2 of the top 100 players. And now we've got a team. That was like how they kept recreating the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And speed. Like, they were at the forefront of the change, especially offensively and defensively, with going away from thumpers at linebackers and getting faster up front, getting faster on, and being innovative in their offense. So that's really how they built that program, on being innovative, speed, and being attractive. Branding. They were one of the first schools to brand with the uniforms and appeal to recruits. So I don't think they can ever be a dynasty, but I think they can be a thorn in the side.
Yes,
of USC. And
Yes.
Oregon always, Brian, it's amazing. They can have these great teams, and they will lose the weirdest game.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll be getting ready for a top 10 matchup against USC in 2 weeks, and they'll lose to like Oregon State in overtime.
Well, look who their one loss was to early this year before they fell apart. Stanford.
A bad Stanford team.
And I mean, there was reasons. I mean, their offensive coordinator, but the reality is that was still a bad, like you just said it, that was a bad Stanford team. You shouldn't lose your OC and still lose to a bad Stanford team if you're a healthy program. I think there's a cap there.
Yeah.
There's a cap there, in my opinion, that doesn't exist at USC as much, right? But it's still harder for USC to be a dynasty now than it was 20 years ago.
Would you
because the West Coast just doesn't produce the same type of kids it used to?
We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Just knowing the history. If the right guy was at Washington, would you trust Washington more than Oregon to have a better run?
No. Okay. No. And the reason I say that is because I think Oregon, like that you just mentioned, Oregon can go to the Southeast and steal the athletes that they're currently missing from the Northwest.
Yeah.
And if USC is USC, some of the athletes they're getting from the West Coast, they're not getting. Mm-hmm. If USC is USC, they don't get Kayvon Thibodeau. USC gets them, right? But Oregon can go to the Southeast and steal a kid from Georgia. Now with NIL, maybe buy some kids or whatever. I mean, but they've got, like you said, every kid's they made. Richard Young took an unofficial visit to Oregon. He's going to take an official visit to Oregon. You know what I mean? Right. Yeah. Washington's not getting Richard Young on campus. I don't care how good they are. No. I think Washington is a better football state than Oregon, which is where Washington can be effective.
Right.
I think Washington, if with the right coach, we saw this with Chris Peterson, Washington can become arguably the most steady program in the Pac-12. Like just every year they're a good team, and occasionally they'll have a 2016 playoff run, but they're not going to win the title.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the difference for me, Sean, is I think their ceiling isn't as high as Oregon's. That's the thing. I don't think they have a team that could occasionally maybe even actually compete for a title if they get the right quarterback.
Yeah.
I just don't think they're that. I think Oregon can maybe be that. And that's the thing that keeps me from saying the dynasty part. I don't think they can get over that hump.
Yeah.
That's my thing. But if they hire the right coach, and I think I like the Kalen DeBoer hire. I do. I don't know if he's going to be able to recruit, but I think he's a good football coach. I think they can, because Washington will produce some big time players.
Yeah, they put players in the NFL all the time.
Again, not a high volume,
right?
But I mean, they've had 4 or 5 5-star kids in the last 4 or 5 years that they've all gone somewhere else for the most part. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so look at Notre Dame. I mean, Tobias Merriweather and Jaden Lamar. I mean, those are kids that if Washington can start keeping those kids in state, then they can start being a consistently 9-10 win caliber team. I just don't think there's enough out there for them to be. And Seattle's not what it used to be either, right? I mean, there's a lot going on in Seattle that makes it not as an attractive a place that you want to send your child. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we'll get too much into that, but you get what I'm saying. It wasn't like it was 20 years ago when Seattle was a happening place.
I think when Chris Peterson got there, he had opportunities. He just lost the big games.
Yeah.
If they had a quarterback against Alabama, they played Alabama tough in that semifinal game.
Yeah, and they had speed on the outside. I mean, Dante Pettis and
on the outside, they just didn't have the quarterback. Yeah.
And I don't think they had the line either in that particular game. Like they could somewhat, and so it's interesting, Sean. I think Washington could be a consistently really good team. I just have doubts that they can kind of get over that hump and become a title contender. There's 2 teams I want to talk about, Sean, and we wrap this up because we're way longer than what I thought we're going to be, and I did want to answer a couple questions here before we got out of here. But the one question I have for you is: Can Miami get back to being the U? Can they? Not will they, but can they? I think that's the first question that needs to be addressed.
I think they found the right guy.
Okay. So theoretically, you do think Miami still has a chance to be that program? Okay.
I do. I think they found the right guy, and I think They found a guy that was out on the West Coast and had to recruit a totally different region than Miami was used to, which is as long as we control the state of Florida, we're good, right? And that mindset doesn't work anymore. You have to be able to recruit nationally if you're Miami. And I think
to a degree,
you know, but you have to be able to go into the state of Texas. I mean, when Miami was like at their peak, they were going to get, you know, top players out of the state of California to come down to Miami. You know, they were getting kids from modern day to come to Miami and play, like a DJ Williams. So,
well, De La Salle. Yeah, De La Salle.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Which
like
was the modern day of that time.
Right. So you get those kids to come that usually
they would
go
get
to
DNs
USC.
from Texas.
Yeah. So I think him going to Oregon kind of opened up certain avenues from a recruiting standpoint and gave him a different mindset that when he came back to Miami, he brought a different plan. And he fully had, because he played, he has the full support of the alumni base. The same thing that's going on with Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame former players is the same thing that's going on with Miami players that had not come back in a long time because of the administration, because of things that were going on with the administration. And I think the administration has kind of been put in between a rock and a hard place where they've kind of been forced to say, you know what, we have to support this football program much more.
That's the question mark for me.
Yeah. But this is the question, and I asked this question to a couple of guys that I know that are alumni from Miami. You guys are no longer the biggest show in town. Like, Miami football was always the big ticket in South Florida. Now you have the Heat. You have the Dolphins who are getting better. Now, how do you bring that same attention?
The Heat. You have the Heat now are very popular. Yeah.
So that's going to be a challenge. And then being in the ACC, they could go on a run in the ACC.
Right.
They could.
Here's why I think if Miami has the right leadership, and again, it's not about football. I mean, if you're this happened to Lou Holtz in the 90s.
Absolutely.
If your administration does not support you, you have a cap on how good you can be. And that's what hurt Lou Holtz. He had to fight against a program or he had to fight against an administration that didn't like the fact he wanted to build an elite program. Like that's the reality of it. And Miami's dealt with that. I mean, go watch the U thing with that clown president that they had back then. And you know, and that Tad, right? Like, first of all, your name's Tad. Like, don't even get me started on that, right? But Sean, the thing about Miami is Miami is in a completely different universe than USC, because right now, for the last decade, people have been fleeing the state of California.
Absolutely.
Right now, Florida's in a situation where
growth is ridiculous.
Insane.
Especially
and people are flocking to the state of Florida.
Yes.
I mean, so it's a completely different universe than what USC is going through and what the West Coast is going through, just from a population shift.
Yeah.
You know, and so that helps keep that ability to go recruit. You can still predominantly recruit the state of Florida. Now, what I'll say this, it's harder to dominate the state of Miami. Now, I'm using that phrase purposely because that's what Howard Schnellenberger, basically, that was his philosophy. We're going to dominate the state of Miami, which they basically called like, so was it like Orlando on down? The state of Miami. I mean, we're going to dominate this region and we're going to get every kid we want to get from there, basically.
Yeah.
And for the most part, they did. I mean, you know, Notre Dame came and stole Derek Brown, but they didn't lose many of them, right?
Right.
But when you look at it, that talent is still there. That's the difference for Penn State. Penn State can't dominate the Northeast basically only and put together the same kind of teams they could in the 80s. Yeah. They have to leave the region. Notre Dame has to leave the region. Ohio State has to leave. Miami doesn't have to for much.
Yeah.
They can selectively go out to California and Texas and get a DJ Williams as opposed to needing 7 or 8 players from those regions.
Right.
They can recruit Louisiana up to the Carolinas and down and basically fill 95% of their roster.
Yeah.
And so if the administration will support them, I think Miami can get there. But I'm I'm not as sold on it now as I was in the 80s and 90s because there's still some things working against them. You've got to drive over about an hour to go to a home football game from campus. It's still a small campus. It's still a private school. It's still an academic-oriented school, which sometimes can mean maybe your fan base isn't as rabid as the kids that go to school at Ohio State. It's definitely not as numerous as those other schools. Yeah. It's easier for other schools to come into the state of Florida and get kids than it was, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, but I still believe if Miami wins, they will recruit.
Yeah.
And if they hire the right guy, and that's where I think the final piece for Miami is not a team where just anybody can be good. Miami's a team that they need to hire the right guy. And to your point, I do think Mario Cristobal has a chance to be that guy. Manny Diaz was a bad hire.
Yeah.
Said it at the time. It was a bad hire. Mario Cristobal is a good hire.
I agree.
He's a good hire. Do you have to leave, Sean?
No, man. My leg went to sleep. So okay. We've been talking for almost 3 hours.
I know.
My legs were like, hey, stand up. So I'm just getting the blood flowing.
Let's wrap up with Notre Dame.
Okay.
Because this is the one I think people care more about now.
Right.
Can Notre Dame be a dynasty like they were even not even just the 70s and the 40s and the 20s and 30s, but can they be a dynasty in the way that they were in the Lou Holtz era? Because I believe, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, I believe that if the college football playoff existed in the 80s and 90s, Notre Dame has at least one more title. I comfortably say one more title. Because I think a case could be made, and you and I discussed this, a case could be made that maybe they don't win it in 1988. Because they'd have had to play Miami in a rematch, and it would have been tough to beat that Miami team twice.
Right.
But my counter argument is, but then the same thing would have happened in 89 in the reverse.
Right.
They would have beat Miami in a rematch in the playoff. Right. So 88, 89, you win one of them. Because I'll still contend 88 might have been the best team that Notre Dame had. 89 was the most talented team that Notre Dame had. And I think that they probably would have won they would have won a title in 93. I think they would have beat that Florida State team again. Like the difference between 89 and 90 in 90, the difference between Notre Dame versus Florida State in 93 was greater than the difference between Notre Dame and Miami in 88 and 89. Those were two pretty even teams. I think Notre Dame was significantly better than Florida State. I think the only way Florida State could have beat Notre Dame is in Tallahassee. And a playoff game wouldn't have been in Tallahassee.
No.
They would have dominated because the difference is Notre Dame, Miami had great lines, especially D-line. And so Florida State didn't. Florida State was all about speed. I mean, they had some great linemen, Walter Jones, they had some individual great players. They never had great lines on offense. And then they would have some great defensive ends, but you could push them around. They were built on speed. Notre Dame could push them around.
Yeah.
So I think Notre Dame wins 2 titles. Maybe a third. I mean, you could get into that, but I mean, that's pushing it. I think they certainly win 2 titles, but they have some very, very, very good football teams, in my opinion, Sean. And, so can Notre Dame be that again? Where when you go 10-1-1, or in this instance, 10-2 in a season with the players that Notre Dame had in like 1990, for 92, for example, that's considered a disappointment. You still finish 4th, right?
Yeah.
But I'll say this. Like that 94 team, maybe they make the playoff if there's a playoff. I mean, they finished 5th in the AP poll, but the AP wouldn't have been the ones doing the ranking.
Right.
So those are the things I think about, Sean, is can Notre Dame be that again? Can they be that team again?
Yeah.
And if so, what needs to happen to do it? That's the question. So number one, I think you and I both have the same answer. The answer is yes. They can be it. They can be that team again.
Yep.
But what needs to happen to do it? I think the first step was already taken. You need a dynamic. Lou Holtz was a dynamic head coach.
Dynamic.
Ara Parseghian was a dynamic head coach.
Yep.
Frank Leahy. Newt Rockne. The only coach to me that won a title and wasn't a dynamic head coach was Dan Devine, from what I'm told. But he still was a really good football coach who had success at other programs. You need the right head coach. I think they got it. At least from a recruiting and a dynamic personality standpoint. Whether or not he can coach at that level, we'll find out, right? We'll find that out. But I do believe Notre Dame can be that program but you have to hire someone who knows how to go on the road and recruit and can be dynamic and really sell, because Notre Dame in 2022 is not Notre Dame of 1990. There's a lot of the game has changed, college football has changed, demographics have changed. You're not getting Rocket Ismail and Ricky Waters out of Pennsylvania anymore, which makes it harder. You've got to now go down to Florida, California, Texas, and find that kid more often than not.
Yeah.
And so you need an even more dynamic head coach now as a recruiter even than you needed even then. And so people talk about Chad Bowden's the new Vinny Serrato, and I agree. But that doesn't work if you don't also have Marcus Freeman as your head football coach.
Absolutely.
As great as Chad has done, it works because it's the combination of Chad and Coach Freeman.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah.
In my opinion, that's the key.
I think the next thing, everything you said, I totally agree. And this goes back, I hate to come back to this same thing. The quarterback position is going to be key.
Yeah.
Moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be very key, especially if we're talking about sustained excellence and trying to measure up to what Lou Holtz was able to do. The game was different. And we talked about this. You know, if you really take a look, 93 and 94, Lou Holtz was opening up the offense and recruiting totally different offensively, you know, and the plan he had for Jarius Jackson, you know,
you're trying to get me fired up today, man. You're going to bring up Randy Moss and
he wasn't bringing in Randy Moss to hand the ball off 50 times,
right?
Brian.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? You start seeing the screens, middle screens to the tight ends and the screens to the wide receivers on the outside. He saw the change coming in college football, and he was starting to adjust to it. And Notre Dame would have kept things going if not for the issues with administration and some other things in his health. Marcus Freeman, from a health standpoint, I think he's going to be good. From a coaching standpoint, he's going to get better.
Right.
Game day coaching, he's going to get better.
Right.
Will he have some bumps in the road? I would venture to say, yeah.
Probably.
He'll have some bumps in the road, probably. But
if he doesn't, then this thing's going to get really crazy soon.
Absolutely.
Right.
And on top of that, I pointed this out. Once it happens, I think we'll see the dominoes. But the quarterback position, the acquisition, not the acquisition because the kid is choosing to come to your school, but getting elite talent to choose Notre Dame, developing them, getting that first round pick, all of that are things that you need to see to be able to sustain excellence and come close to anything that Alabama's done in the modern era. That's a very, very important position. Heck, the talent has already been raised at every other position in recruiting.
Right.
In my opinion. So we expect that. But that quarterback position, as far as
it's so key. It's so key. It's Tyler Buckner's got to be what we think he is, and they got to get Dante Moore. Yes. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
It's Sean, because I think here's an advantage that Notre Dame has. That Notre Dame has some disadvantages from the NIL thing. I mean, we're going to be honest about that, right? I mean, some kids are just going to want to be bought. I've always said you're not going to lose many of those kids, though. You're going to lose a Cardinal Tate, but some of those kids that are taking NIL deals. Like Nico was never going to be.
Right?
What's that?
Certain positions more than
certain positions, but more so certain players.
Yeah,
and there's still. I mean, Braylon James is. I don't know. Get into that, but anyway, there's going to be Braylon Jameses and Jane Greathouses. You know those guys are getting NIL deals, but they are kids who understand. Like, but there's, I take 6 figures now, or $1 million now, and to go to a school that hasn't had a wide receiver. Like if you're a receiver looking at A&M, you're thinking, hold on a second, I'm going to take $2 million now to go to a school that hasn't had a receiver get drafted in like a decade since Mike Evans, right? Yeah. Or I'm going to go to Notre Dame where they're pumping out first, second round picks at receiver constantly. And those guys are making a whole lot more than $2 million, right? That's more than $2 million difference.
Yeah.
And I got $2 million to play college football, but then I don't get drafted. Whereas I go to Notre Dame and maybe I make $500,000 on NIL stuff, but I'm going to get drafted in the first or second round and make 8 figures. These kids are I've had these conversations where this is being brought up to me.
Yeah.
This isn't me convincing them of. That's not my job. I don't bring those things up. This is what they're saying to us. They get it. These kids, some of these kids, a lot of these kids are smarter than we give them credit for. They think like, oh, of course a kid's going to get offered $1 million and take it. Don't project your thing onto them. Because because you got to understand, for a 5-star kid, if he's smart and has good structured home,
yeah,
he's going to understand that this $1 million is an immediate short-term thing, but my value is far greater than that if I go to the right place.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the conversation. But the point being, Sean, with Notre Dame is the advantage that Notre Dame has in this era of the transfer portal is Notre Dame will not lose kids the way that other schools are going to lose kids. Because you and I know this.
Yeah.
There were players at Notre Dame that could have easily left and transferred because they disliked the current coach and their assistant, and they were miserable in football, but they wanted that degree.
Absolutely.
That's why they picked Notre Dame.
Absolutely.
So they're going to stay for the 3 years, get their degree, and then leave. Well, if that kid is doing that now, but then his circumstances change, he may stay.
Yeah.
And we've seen that too, where kids thought they were going to leave after 3 years. Their circumstances changed. Houston Griffith, kid entered the portal. He was going to leave. Marcus Freeman gets hired. He comes back. Now he's coming back for a 5th year, knowing he's not guaranteed of anything. Right? Why? Because he wants to be a part of that culture. But you're not going to see freshmen and sophomores transferring a ton from Notre Dame.
No.
It has nothing to do with the head coach.
Yeah.
That's not even a Marcus Freeman thing.
Oh,
because that was happening under Brian Kelly because of the Notre Dame degree still carries a lot of weight. And so that's an advantage. But here's the interesting thing. You brought up.
Can I ask you a question right quick?
Sure.
You guys did a show, if I'm not mistaken, in January, where you guys kind of predicted like how many transfers you would see off the roster. Didn't come anywhere close, did it?
None of them.
Yeah.
The only guys that have transferred, the guys that weren't brought back, 5th-year guys that like Sebo Flemisser who didn't have a spot back, like they're over the scholarship limit because nobody left.
And they wanted back. Why is that? Because they want to play for Marcus Freeman.
Right.
Yeah.
Now that eventually is going to wear off.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, just because kids are going to understand, hey, I want to play. I mean, there's going to be some kids who are buried on the depth chart that, and hey, coach, do I have a future here? Nah, buddy, there's going to be some of that, but it's just not going to happen a ton. So that is the thing that helps them. But, you brought up the 95 team because here's what I think a lot of people forget. Lou Holtz was getting ready to go through a second wave of success. This is what a lot of people forget about Notre Dame.
Yes.
The Randy Moss, James Jackson thing, which basically was the administration not supporting the football team, not having the kids back, like they were looking for a reason to drop Randy Moss. Like they didn't let the thing be seen through. Like, same thing with James Jackson. That kid was committed and, signed and all that. But this is what that freshman class was gonna be. That I think a lot of people don't realize how good that 95 freshman class was going to be. You had Jarius Jackson at quarterback, Autry Denson at running back. You had Randy Moss and Bobby Brown at receiver. That class also had Lamont Bryant. That class also, I said Autry Denson already. Jimmy Friday was in that class. Benny Gilbo. James Jackson, who went on to be a 1,000-yard rusher and NFL draft pick and NFL running back with the Browns. Jarius Jackson was part of that recruiting class. You had some other big-time names. Mike Rosenthal was first-round draft pick, was part of that class, that freshman class. Corey Minor was part of that freshman class. And, of course, Tim Ritter was part of that freshman class. Notre Dame had a great freshman class that year. Hunter Smith was an longtime NFL punter, was part of that class. Jamie Spencer was a big-time recruit coming out in that class. Joe Thomas was part of that class. John Wagner, Jerry Wisney was part of that class. Like that was going to be a phenomenal class. But the linchpin of that was Randy Moss and James Jackson. The 1-2 punch of James Jackson and Autry Denson would have been with Randy Moss, Bobby Brown, Malcolm Johnson, Derek Mays on the outside was going to be nasty.
Nasty.
And then you still had another year of Ron. You had what, 2 more years left of Ron Paulus, which I think would have made his career better. And then you would have had Jarius emerging, filling for Ron when those guys were veterans.
Right.
Notre Dame was about to go through a second wave under Lou. And now maybe Lou still has to retire in 96 because of the injuries, right? The neck issue and all that. But if Notre Dame supported the football program, they wouldn't have hired Bob Davie to replace Lou.
Yeah.
They hired somebody better.
Somebody better.
Yeah. And that's my thing. So, I mean, Corey Minor was a 5-star recruit. Randy Moss was a 5-star recruit. Getting Jarius Jackson out of Mississippi was a big-time haul. Mike Rosenthal was, ended up being a first-round draft pick. Jimmy Friday was a big-time recruit. Like that, Lamont Bryant was a really good recruit. That was going to be that's a top 5 recruiting class, if not a number 1 recruiting class. I mean, that is a big-time recruiting class. It's just the administration doesn't support football. Well, that's not an issue right now for Notre Dame.
Nah.
And hasn't been for a decade. And one of the questions we had was about the facilities is that facilities are not it's been 3-4 years since any kid has ever mentioned facilities to me in a negative. It's probably been longer than that. Notre Dame's facilities are good. They are very good now. And yes, the Goog needs updated. So what? That's not the thing that's holding people back. The only person that views the Goog as a hold up to the program is Brian Kelly. That's it. And that's what I'm going to say. It hasn't been a hold up for Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman and that staff, right?
No.
And so, yeah, I think Notre Dame can be that program. I don't know if Marcus Freeman is the guy to get him there. We just need to see him coach it. I believe he is.
Yeah.
I believe he is, but we need to see it. But the recruiting piece is already there. We're already seeing that. In an era of NIL, Notre Dame I literally had a parent tell me that my kid has been offered, and the number was just kind of staggering. And he's like, but we told him, y'all don't understand. That doesn't mean a whole lot to us because of what my child's going to have opportunity to make that kind of money in his life if he even doesn't make it to the NFL because he's got a degree from Notre Dame. I mean, that's what people don't understand.
Right.
Right. Brandon Wimbush is never going to play it down in the NFL. Brandon Wimbush is going to make money because of that Notre Dame degree, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. So anyway, Sean, got a couple questions I did want to get to here. We're not going to get through all of them because the show is way long. We did some super chats and some other things I did want to get to. Brandon Plesner says, thank you for the super chat, Brandon. He says, very curious what this new staff has planned for the recruits during the OV. Says Marcus Freeman invested in a lake house yet. After seeing BK's recruiting antics at LSU, I'd be scared to attend a BK Lake House visit. That is some fire right there from Brandon. So there's some harsh criticisms thrown in there. Marcus Freeman does not have a lake house. He has a really nice pool, but not a lake house. It's really, I mean, they're going to roll out the red carpet. There's no question about it. I mean, they're going to roll out the red carpet. But that's cool and everything, but it's going to be about what happens when you sit down in those meetings. What happens when you get on the board and Al Golden has to explain to Jaden Ausberry how he fits into this Notre Dame defense? That's what's going to truly matter. Jaden Ausberry is going to be impressed by the red carpet that's rolled out, the photo shoot and all that, the gold throne. But you know what's going to make Jaden Ausberry? This is one of the reasons I love that kid. He's going to want to say, what is my meeting like with the academic people, that they're going to lay out what this is going to do for me academically. And I'm going to get on the board with Al Golden, and he's going to have to explain to me how he's going to make me, him and James Laurinaitis, and how he's going to make me a great linebacker in a high draft pick. Look, I know the academic piece is there. That's going to matter a whole lot more. If that doesn't matter, it doesn't matter about the red. This is what y'all have to understand. Notre Dame kids, at the end of the day, don't care about the gold throne. They don't care about the red carpet. They don't care about they are going to sit down there. There's 2 things that you need to explain to me. Explain to me how this degree is going to set me up for life if football doesn't work. And explain to me, get on the board, explain to me, show me the film, show me how you're going to develop me into a first-round draft pick. That's what those kids, that's ultimately what Charles Jagasaw and Monroe Freeling need to hear. That's what Dante Moore needs to hear. That's what Jaden Greathouse and and Ronan Hannafin and Jaden Osbury and Micah Bell and Christian Gray and Caleb Downs and Jason Moore. That's what those kids ultimately need to hear. That's going to be what determines whether they get those kids or not. Jason Moore is talking about wanting to get to a practice because he wants to see Al Washington at work. Sitting on the gold throne in a photo shoot is going to be fun and it's cool and the kids love it, but that's not why Jason Moore is going to pick Notre Dame or not.
Right.
And this is a great question, Brandon, because he's not necessarily saying that. I'm answering Brandon's question. I think Brandon understands this. He's a sharp guy, but like those are the things that are going to be planned, and the fun and all that stuff is going to be part of it, and it's going to be part of the whole atmosphere and the feel. At the end of the day, it's going to be getting on the chalkboard and explain. Okay, I guess it's a whiteboard now. Getting the film out and showing these kids, here's why we want you. Because this is what we think you can do for us, and this is what we think we can do for you, and then talking to the academic people. Those are going to be the two things that have the biggest impact, and those are the things that are going to be able to convince these kids to jump into class or not. That's what's going to matter to them, Sean.
And what makes it even more incredible is just how nuanced recruiting is when it comes to these prospects. For example, Charles Jagasaw, great conversation with Harry Heastan, loved practice. The most important thing to him was walking around in his time with the offensive lineman. Like that made the biggest impression. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And it was, and the interesting thing from your interview with him was it wasn't even the watching he stand with the starters.
No.
It was watching how he coached up the number twos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. Like every recruit is looking for something different. And like the staff has to know what that guy needs and what he's looking for. And then you have the coach or the parents and what they're looking for. And that's where Chad Bowden comes in and where he's done an incredible job of being able to tap into that, to tap into the parents, build those relationships and make them feel comfortable with the program, with the school. And then you bring in Marcus Freeman and just how magnanimous he is as a coach and how he comes across. And everyone falls in love with him. And then you go to the coaches and watching how they coach, and then watching how once again, what Ryan Barnes said, the team morale is totally different. So now there's a totally different vibe now in recruiting. That recruits come in and
let's explain why that matters, Sean, because no matter how much you try to keep players away from recruits away from the unhappy players, they are during an official visit, they're going to meet them. They're going to know.
Yeah.
And look, Notre Dame has a kid that they landed out of the Southeast on the current team. I don't say who it is or position. He was a highly ranked kid. He was told during his visit that most of the players don't like Brian Kelly. I was told this at the time. He didn't like Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly never talked to the parents. He picked Notre Dame because it's Notre Dame and because of what they produce at that position. Right? Yeah. And so you were getting kids like that in spite of that culture. That's why that comment from Ryan Barnes, and we've had stuff on the Irish Breakdown message board where I've told to people, like, some of the intel features we've dropped is there's people telling us, like, I had something on Michael Mayer a couple weeks ago, and part of the reason he has rejected all overtures from other programs that have reached out saying, hey, if you come here, we can get you, 7 figures and all this other kind of stuff, is because he wants to be a part of what Notre Dame's building with Marcus Freeman. And maybe some of these kids would have entertained those offers if Brian Kelly was still around. I've been told that too. We don't know that. And I don't want to, that's not the focus of what this is about. But the point is, when they get around to what Sean, you were saying is when they get around the players, because the players will be back. They report for school June 5th for summer school. The Notre Dame players are going to be on campus that weekend. It's not going to be a dead campus. They're going to get time to say, why is it different? And they're going to be able to explain it to them in a way that they haven't been during unofficials, during brief lunch conversations. And that to me is something that I also think is going to really be impactful when it comes to closing out on these kids down the stretch. That is going to be huge, in my opinion. 2 more questions. We got to get out of here. Anthony L. with a super chat. Thank you very much for that, Anthony. He's church tomorrow. Laughing at my comment about you having church tomorrow. Since pregame show planned, will Irish Breakdown still host BYO tailgates? And he says, B. Kelly reminds me of Shooter McGavin. Shooter. Just so you know, with the tailgates, I'm not going to be a part of the pregame show other than a couple segments. So I'll have an early segment during the Notre Dame portion where I'll probably still be at home because the shows are going to be from 10 to 2 or 10 to noon. And then the games are not till like 2:30, 3:30. So we'll still be having tailgates, but I'll have my segment early, and then I still plan on being in all the tailgates. Obviously, Vince won't be going until after the show is over, and Sean won't be showing up till after. Sean Stiers. I didn't think this through, Sean. We have 2 Seans, a Ryan, and a Brian on this staff now, which is just not good planning in that regard. But good Sean Stiers, what's that?
Good continuity.
What's that?
Easy
right.
to remember.
I feel like George Foreman, where I just name all my kids George, so I just yell George, get over here, and all the kids come running. So but they'll be hosting those shows. Sean and Vince will be hosting those shows. I'll come on for like a segment, like a 15-minute segment. Ryan will come on to do but they're going to be the ones doing that show, and it won't be us. But it's we'll still be having the tailgates. There's no doubt. But that's a good question because I think that's a very fair question. Last thing I want to discuss, Sean, from Dareth. Dareth says wide receiver recruiting seems to be a struggle more often than not. I feel about wide receiver recruiting the same way I felt about running back recruiting during the Autry Denson era. And one of the frustrating things that I talked about is people talk about how much of a struggle it was to land top backs. And I was like, well, it wasn't an issue for Tony Alford, and it wasn't an issue for Bernie Parmalee, and it wasn't really an issue for Lance Taylor, and it's not an issue for Dylan McCullough. It was an issue for Autry Denson because he didn't put in the work. We forget that for about a 10-year period, Notre Dame recruited a lot of highly ranked wide receivers, going all the way back to the 2007 when they signed Golden Tate, who was ranked as a top 25 player by ESPN. They signed Deval Kamara, who was a 5-star kid that year. The next year, they went out and got Michael Floyd, who was a 5-star. Deion Walker was a top 100 player. They got Shaq Evans the next year, who was a top 100 player. Early on in Kelly's tenure, it was not as great, but then you had Will Fuller and Corey Robinson, Torrey Hunter in 13. In 15, you had the class that was Miles Boykin. You had Equanimous St. Brown. You had C.J. Sanders and Jalen Guyton. That was 3 of those guys are in the NFL right now. The next year in 16, you had Javon McKinley, Chase Claypool, Kevin Stefferson. That was a really good receiving core. So the issues for Notre Dame were when Dell Alexander showed up. That was more of the problem, especially in recent years. But even during Dell's tenure, you had a class that had Braden Lindsey, Kevin Austin, Micah Jones, who was a highly ranked kid, 250-ish kid, and Lawrence Keys, who I liked a lot. In 2020, you had Jordan Johnson, who was a 5-star kid, Xavier Watts, who I liked a lot. Then 2021, you had Lorenzo Styles, you had Deion Colsey, you had Jane Thomas. The issue was development and keeping kids here under Dell. Notre Dame's been able to recruit receivers. It's keeping them and developing them that's been an issue in recent years. But there was a stretch where, from, like I said, from the 2009 draft or the 2010 draft to the 2016 draft, Notre Dame had 2 first-round picks, and Golden Tate was not one of them. He was a second-round pick. TJ Jones, they turned into a draftable player who, got the most out of him. So this has been more of a recent issue with Dell, not a receiver problem at Notre Dame. I would agree. And so I don't think receiver recruiting is going to be the struggle it was. Are they going to recruit 4 Julio Joneses a year? No. But that's not what you need, in my opinion. You need to land really darn good football players. And a recruiting class that has Braylon James, Jaden Greathouse, Ronan Hannafin as your top 3. And then after that, whether it's Rico or Malik Elzy or whoever the case may be, if those guys are your 4th receivers in a class, you've got a darn good receiving core. Because Hannafin, Greathouse, and Braylon James is going to be one of the best trios in the country, in my opinion, if you're looking at it from a talent and what coaches value as opposed to what a bunch of people sitting behind a keyboard value.
Right.
And that's how I feel about it.
I mean, the only trio that could rival that is the trio that Ohio State is getting to land, wants to land. If Ohio State lands that trio, then tip your cap. You get Brandon Ennis, Noah Rogers, and Carnell Tate. Hey, good job. But we're cool with Ronan, Braylon, Jaden, and if we add anybody, we're cool. Like, That's a good class. I think people might be looking for that one guy, that one name guy that you can say, okay, we got this guy. But at this point, you know what? I would rather take quality quantity over just getting that one guy up top and then kind of adding to the back end. When you add 3 to 4 guys that all can bring something to the offense at a certain level and bring something to that room, give me that in back-to-back classes, because we have lacked
right
in previous recruiting classes. Build up, and
right.
eventually you'll start getting those top guys along with those other guys underneath. And then you'll see the wide receiver room and that whole narrative change in another year or two.
Put points on the board, show that you can coach those kids up, and they're going to come. There's no doubt about it. There's always people trying to start stuff. Michael Peake trying to start this. Hold on. How do you know he has a very nice pool? Talking about Marcus Freeman. Is Marcus Freeman your inside contact? It's on Twitter, man. It's on Twitter. He's tweeted out pictures of him, of kids and the players and other coaches at his pool.
Absolutely.
So that's how I know he has a nice pool. No, I've not been over in Marcus Freeman's pool. But love the attempt. I'm always trying to find that, trying to find those little takeaways and stuff like that. But anyway, hey, Sean, great show, man. Obviously went way longer than it did, but you and I, that tends to be the case with us. So but it was a great show.
Conversation, guys.
This is exactly what it is. We decided to start airing the phone conversations that we have about once a week. So it's definitely worked out. But we can continue some of these questions and discussions on the message boards, everybody. So just make sure you sign up for that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. $49.99 for an entire year of great intel and great conversation, great news and updates. And we're going to have a ton of stuff planned here moving forward with some members only things that I'm excited about that we're going to launch here soon. $4.99 a month. And these are not introductory offers. This is just what it is. Check out the merch store. You can get that sweet hat that Sean has. The polos like this are on there. Tons of t-shirts, gap closer shows, really comfortable sweats, all types of cool stuff on the merch store as well. And of course, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via a podcast format, please give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. And as always, thank you all so much. And thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.